For 18 months, this boy hadn't spoken a single word. Not since the night his parents died. The doctor said he'd never speak again. They called it permanent trauma. Tommy screaming, "Murderer!" If you want to know what happened next, and trust me, you do hit that like button right now. Subscribe so you don't miss the ending. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Are you in New York, Texas? Maybe somewhere across the ocean. Now let's go back to where this all started. Spring 1974. An old man sits on a porch in Wyoming about to tell his great-great-grandchildren a story. A story about how a woman with 62 cents saved a dying cowboy and changed everything. Tommy, pull up a chair, children. What I'm about to tell you happened in the autumn of 1883. Abigail Winters. Sir, can you hear me? Abigail Winters knelt beside a dying man in the mud. Blood covered her hands. Not hers. His. The stranger's skull had split open where it struck the rock, and crimson seeped through her fingers, no matter how hard she pressed the torn strip of her petticoat against the wound. His face was pale beneath 3 days of stubble, and trail dust lips cracked and colorless. One arm stretched toward the creek water 10 feet away, like he'd been crawling toward it when his strength gave out. The September sun hammered down on her back. Sweat traced lines through the dust on her cheeks. Her knees sank deeper into the creek bank with every second she held pressure on his head, the cold mud soaking through her already ruined skirt. 300 yards downstream, a black mare stood in the shallows, silver conchos on her saddle catching light like warning signals. A riderless horse always meant trouble. Her father had taught her that. "Sir," Abigail's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered. For half a second, they focused on her face. Whiskey-colored, gold and amber and brown all mixed together, pupils blown wide with pain and shock. "Who?" His voice was barely a rasp. A wet sound rattled in his chest. "Are you someone who's not letting you die today?" Abigail shifted her weight, using her knee to brace his shoulder as she checked the wound again. Deep, 3 inches long, but the skull beneath felt intact. Grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Head wounds always bleed like the devil, Abby girl. Don't let the blood fool you. Check for fracture first." No fracture. Thank God for small mercies. The man tried to sit up, failed. His head lolled back against her arm, and she felt the full weight of him, a grown man twice her size, going limp. "Stay with me," she said louder this time. "I need you conscious. Tell me your name." Nothing. His eyes had rolled back, showing whites. Abigail's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She'd come to Broken Creek to gather feverfew and yarrow, the plants her grandmother had taught her to harvest for headaches and wounds. Her canvas sack lay abandoned 15 feet away, half full of herbs that wouldn't do a damn bit of good if this man bled out before she could get him help. The mare whinnied, high and nervous. Abigail looked up, took in the scene properly for the first time. Boot prints in the mud, scuffed earth where something heavy had dragged, broken willow branches hanging at wrong angles. And there, caught on a rock in the middle of the creek, a man's hat with the crown dented and water-stained. This wasn't an accident. Someone had hurt this man. On purpose. Recently. And whoever did it might still be close. The thought sent ice down her spine despite the heat. Abigail scanned the cottonwoods lining the creek, the open meadow beyond the rocky outcrop to the north where someone could hide and watch. Nothing moved except grass bending in the wind and the mare shifting her weight in the shallows. She was alone, with a stranger bleeding in her lap, miles from town. Abigail made her decision. She couldn't leave him, couldn't ride for help, and hope he'd still be breathing when she got back. The only option was to get him on that horse and get him somewhere with the doctor, even if it killed her to try. "All right," she said to the unconscious man. To herself, to God if he was listening, "Let's see what I'm made of." "Friend, pull up a chair and settle in close." The voice belonged to an old man, 98 years old, sitting in a rocking chair on a porch that had weathered 90 winters. His hands, gnarled with arthritis, held a jar of apple butter that caught the afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen window behind him. "What I'm about to tell you happened in the autumn of 1883 in a place called Cedar Bend, Wyoming territory." I know what you're thinking. Another tale about the Old West, cowboys and cattle and wide open spaces. But this story, this one's different. The old man's great-great-grandchildren sat on the porch steps, three of them ranging from ages 7 to 14. The youngest held a recorder, the red light blinking steady. It's about the kind of courage that doesn't come with a gun or a badge. It's about the quiet kind, the sort that keeps a woman standing tall when the whole world's telling her to break. You see, back in those days, a woman alone was about as welcome as a snake in a Sunday school. Didn't matter if she could work harder than most men. Didn't matter if she had more grit than gravel. What mattered was that she had a man's name to stand behind, or she had nothing at all. This is the story of a woman who arrived in Cedar Bend with nothing. And I do mean nothing. No husband waiting at the station, no family to claim her, no place to lay her head come nightfall. Just a worn carpet bag, 62 cents in her pocket, and a piece of paper that turned out to be worth less than the ink it was printed on. The old man paused, set down the apple butter jar, looked at each child in turn. But here's the thing about rock bottom, friend. Sometimes that's exactly where the Lord puts you so you can see what you're really made of. Now let me tell you about Abigail Winters. But 8 miles away in Cedar Bend, a man was waiting at the train station. A man who would change everything. Except he wasn't really a man. He was a ghost, a name on paper, a promise made of lies. Abigail didn't know that yet. Wouldn't know for another 3 hours when the 317 from Cheyenne pulled into Cedar Bend 43 minutes late, and she stepped onto that platform with hope in her heart and a marriage certificate in her pocket. A marriage certificate signed by Charles Henderson, a man who didn't exist. The train platform was nothing more than weathered planks and a roof that sagged in the middle like an old horse's back. Dust hung in the air, thick and golden in the slanting September light. The smell of coal smoke mixed with sage and the promise of distant rain. Abigail stepped down from the passenger car, her boots finding the platform with a soft thud that seemed too loud in the sudden quiet. The train had been full of noise, full of people and their chatter, their plans, their certainties. Now there was only the hiss of the engine cooling and the distant call of a crow somewhere beyond the station. She stood there, carpetbag in hand, and waited. Around her, other passengers moved with purpose. A man in a suit climbed into a waiting buggy. A woman with 2 children was met by a weathered cowboy who swept the youngest child into his arms with a laugh that carried across the platform. An elderly couple walked slowly toward the street, leaning on each other like 2 trees grown together over time. Abigail waited. The paper in her pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric of her traveling dress. She'd read it so many times on the journey west that she could recite every word without looking. The marriage certificate signed and sealed, her name written in careful script on one line, Charles Henderson's bold signature on the other. The promise in writing that she was coming to Wyoming as a bride, that a man was waiting for her, that her life was about to begin. She'd been so careful with that paper, kept it wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from rain in Pennsylvania, from soot and grime on the train, held it close to her chest at night in the cheap hotels where she'd stopped between connections, as if the weight of it against her heart could make it more real. The platform cleared. The train shuddered, belched steam, and began its slow pull away from the station. The sound of it faded into the distance until all that was left was wind moving through cottonwoods along the creek and the creak of the station sign swinging on its chains. Abigail waited. 45 minutes she stood there. Long enough for the sun to slide lower in the sky, long enough for the shadow of the water tower to stretch across the platform like a pointing finger, long enough for her back to ache and her feet to go numb in her good boots, long enough to know deep in the place where hope lives and dies that no one was coming. The station master finally approached. He was a short man with a belly that strained the buttons of his vest and a face red from too much sun or too much whiskey or both. His eyes, when they met hers, held a mixture of pity and impatience. "Miss." Even that one word sounded like an apology. "I got to close up. You expecting someone?" Abigail's throat was dry. She'd finished the last of her water an hour outside of Cheyenne. "Charles Henderson," she said, and her voice came out steady. "Thank the Lord for that small mercy. He was supposed to meet me here." The station master pulled off his cap, scratched at his thinning hair. "Henderson, you say?" "Charles Henderson." "Yes, sir." He shook his head slowly, the way a man does when he's about to deliver bad news and wishes he didn't have to. "Miss, there ain't nobody by that name in Cedar Bend, Ain't never been far as I know, and I've been here 12 years come December. The world tilted slightly, like the platform had turned to water under her feet. Abigail gripped her carpetbag tighter, felt the handles dig into her palm. There must be some mistake. He wrote to me for 6 months. We corresponded. He sent me money for the ticket. How much money? The station master's voice had gone gentle now. The kind of gentle that's worse than harshness because it means the person knows you've been played for a fool. $40. He winced. Miss, I'm real sorry, but I think you've been swindled. There's men out there, they put advertisements in Eastern papers. They write pretty letters and make pretty promises, and they take money from women looking for a fresh start out west. Then them women arrive and find out there ain't no husband, ain't no farm, ain't nothing but an empty platform and a town full of strangers. Abigail heard the words, understood them on some level that didn't require thinking, but her body wouldn't quite believe it yet. Her hand moved to her pocket, pulled out the marriage certificate, unfolded it with fingers that trembled just slightly. But I have this. It's legal. It's signed. The station master glanced at the paper, wouldn't meet her eyes. Yes, ma'am, I expect it is signed by someone, but I'm telling you true. There ain't no Charles Henderson in Cedar Bend. Never has been. From behind them came the sound of footsteps, the rustle of skirts. Abigail turned to see two women standing near the station entrance, both dressed in the kind of clothes that spoke of comfortable lives and husbands who provided well. One was tall and thin, with a face like a hatchet. The other was shorter, rounder, with eyes that darted everywhere like a bird looking for crumbs. Another one, the tall woman said, not bothering to lower her voice. That's the third this year, Martha. These mail-order swindlers are getting bolder. The shorter woman, Martha, clucked her tongue. Shameful, just shameful. These girls come all this way thinking they're going to be wives, and instead they end up. She let the sentence hang there heavy with implication. The station master cleared his throat uncomfortably. Ladies, if you'll excuse us. But Martha wasn't finished. She took a step closer, her eyes moving over Abigail like she was inspecting a horse at auction. Where are you from, girl? Pennsylvania. Abigail's voice came out flat now, stripped of everything but basic facts. Allentown. Long way to come for nothing. Martha shook her head. What will you do now? It was the question Abigail had been avoiding asking herself for the last 45 minutes. What would she do? She had 62 cents. No family within 2,000 miles. No friends in this territory. No husband despite the worthless paper in her hand. She could use some of her remaining money to send a telegram back east begging for help. That probably wouldn't come. Could try to earn enough for a ticket back to Pennsylvania, back to the textile mill, where she'd work 12-hour days for wages that barely kept body and soul together. Could throw herself on the mercy of these women who were looking at her like she was something they'd scrape off their shoes. Or she could do what she'd been doing since her father died 7 years ago. She could stand straight, put one foot in front of the other, and survive. I'll manage, Abigail said. She folded the marriage certificate, creased it small and tight, pushed it deep into her pocket where she wouldn't have to look at it anymore. Thank you for your time, sir. She picked up her carpet bag, adjusted her shawl, walked past the two women without another glance. Her boots rang out on the platform, then went quiet as she stepped down onto the dusty street of Cedar Bend, Wyoming territory. Behind her, she heard Martha's voice sharp and carrying. Bold as brass, that one. Mark my words, she'll come to a bad end. Abigail kept walking. Abigail had a secret in her carpetbag. Something worth more than gold in the Wyoming territory. But she didn't know yet that this secret would save 3 lives before winter came. Didn't know that the knowledge her grandmother had beaten into her head during long Pennsylvania afternoons would be the difference between life and death for a man, a boy, and eventually herself. Inside that worn leather bag, wrapped in a square of linen, was a glass jar no bigger than her palm. And inside that jar were dried herbs crushed and mixed according to recipes passed down through 3 generations of midwives. Feverfew for headaches and inflammation, yarrow for fever and wounds, comfrey for bruises and broken bones. Her grandmother's legacy, worth more than any marriage certificate. Cedar Bend wasn't much to look at. One main street of packed dirt lined on both sides with false front buildings that had seen better days. a general store with windows that needed washing, a saloon with bat-wing doors, and the tinny sound of a piano drifting out into the afternoon. A church with a white steeple that leaned slightly to the left like it was tired of standing up straight. A livery stable at the far end of town. And beyond that, the open country that stretched all the way to the mountains, purple and distant against the sky. Abigail walked the length of the street twice, getting the lay of the land, seeing who saw her and what their faces said. A few cowboys lounged outside the saloon, their eyes tracking her progress with mild interest. An old man sat on a bench in front of the general store, whittling something that might have been a bird or might have been nothing at all. A woman swept the steps of what looked like a boarding house, her movements mechanical, her face hard with the kind of exhaustion that comes from years of work that never ends. By the time the sun touched the tops of the mountains, turning the sky the color of hammered copper, Abigail had made her decisions. She had 62 cents. She needed a place to sleep, and she needed work. The boarding house was called Hargrove's. The sign above the door was hand-painted letters, faded but still legible. Abigail climbed the steps, knocked on the doorframe. The woman with the broom looked up. She was perhaps 50, with gray streaking through dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Lines bracketed her mouth, but her eyes, when they met Abigail's, weren't unkind. "Help you? I'm looking for a room, ma'am, just for tonight." Abigail paused, calculated. "And I'm looking for work, any kind of work. I can clean, cook, mend, tend the sick, whatever needs doing." The woman leaned on her broom, studying Abigail the way the station master had studied her marriage certificate, looking for truth underneath the surface. "You're the girl from the train, the one whose man didn't show." It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in small towns. Abigail met the woman's gaze straight on. "Yes, ma'am." "Got any money?" "Some." "How much is some?" There was no point in lying. 62 cents. The woman's eyebrows went up. "That's not enough for a room. Not even close." "No, ma'am, but it's what I have." Abigail shifted her carpet bag to her other hand. "I was hoping we could work out an arrangement. I'll pay what I can and work off the rest. I'm strong and I'm not afraid of hard work." For a long moment, the woman said nothing. Then she sighed. The kind of sigh that said she was probably going to regret this, but was going to do it anyway. "Name's Violet Hargrove. This is my place. I got a storage room out back of the kitchen. Barely big enough to turn around in, but it's got a cot and it's dry. You can have it for tonight for 10 cents. Tomorrow we'll talk about work." 10 cents. That would leave her with 52 cents. Enough for maybe 2 more nights if Mrs. Hargrove kept the price the same. After that, Abigail would need to have found work or she'd be sleeping under the stars. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm grateful." Mrs. Hargrove waved a hand dismissively. "Don't thank me yet. You might not feel grateful once you see the room." She turned toward the door, then paused. "You had supper." Abigail's stomach had been empty since noon, but she shook her head. Food would cost money she couldn't spare. "I'm fine, ma'am." Mrs. Hargrove made a sound that might have been disapproval or might have been understanding. "There's leftover stew in the kitchen. Not much, but you're welcome to it. No charge for scraps nobody else wanted." Something hot and tight formed behind Abigail's eyes, but she blinked it away before it could turn into tears. She hadn't cried when her father died, hadn't cried through 7 years of mill work, hadn't cried on the platform when the truth finally sank in. She wasn't about to start now. "Thank you," she said again, and followed Mrs. Hargrove into the boarding house. The storage room was exactly as advertised, barely big enough to turn around in, with a narrow cot pushed against one wall and a crate that served as a table. But the cot had a blanket that looked clean, and there was a small window that let in the last of the evening light. And when Abigail sat down on the thin mattress, she felt something in her chest loosen just slightly. She had a roof over her head. For tonight, at least, she was safe. Mrs. Hargrove brought her a bowl of stew, thin and mostly broth, but with a few chunks of potato and carrot floating in it, and half a biscuit that had gone hard around the edges. Abigail ate slowly, making it last, tasting each bite like it was a feast instead of scraps. When she was finished, she set the bowl aside and opened her carpet bag for the first time since leaving Pennsylvania. Everything she owned in the world was in that bag. 2 dresses, both worn but mended with careful stitches. A change of underclothes, her mother's Bible, the pages soft from years of reading. A small cloth pouch that held her sewing kit needles and thread wound tight, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a square of linen, the glass jar. Abigail lifted it carefully, held it up to the fading light. Inside were dried herbs, crushed and mixed according to her grandmother's recipes. Feverfew for headaches and inflammation, yarrow for fever and wounds, comfrey for bruises and broken bones. Her grandmother had been a midwife back in Pennsylvania, had taught Abigail everything she knew about healing before she died. These herbs were worth more than money in their way. They were knowledge, skill, power. She set the jar on the crate next to the empty bowl. Tomorrow she would ask Mrs. Hargrove about work, and if there was no work in town, she would go beyond it. She knew how to forage, how to identify plants that could heal, and plants that could kill. The land around Cedar Bend looked wild, untamed. There would be herbs growing along the creeks and in the meadows. She could gather them, dry them, sell them to whoever needed them. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something, and something was more than nothing. Abigail lay down on the narrow cot, still fully dressed, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Through the small window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, cold and bright and impossibly far away. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, her few remaining acquaintances probably thought she was settling into her new life as a rancher's wife. Somewhere in Cedar Bend, people were probably still gossiping about the foolish girl who'd been taken in by a mail-order swindle. And somewhere a man named Charles Henderson, if that was even his real name, was probably laughing about the $40 he'd stolen from a woman desperate enough to believe in his promises. Abigail closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready for it or not. She might as well rest while she could. 100 miles east in Cheyenne, a man sat at a mahogany desk in an office that smelled of cigar smoke and expensive leather. William Augustus Crane, 52 years old, banker and investor, reviewed a stack of loan documents with the careful attention of a man who'd built an empire on other people's desperation. At the top of the stack, Nathan Holloway, Broken Creek Ranch, 8,000 acres, 1,200 head of cattle, loan amount $5,000 at 18% interest, due date December 24th, 1883, 90 days. Crane smiled, set down his pen, picked up a glass of bourbon that caught the lamplight like liquid amber. In 90 days, Nathan Holloway would default. The ranch would be his, and the silver vein underneath it, worth $2 million, would finally be within reach. Everything was going according to plan. Almost everything. The only variable was the woman. The mail-order bride, who wasn't supposed to be a problem because there wasn't supposed to be a mail-order bride at all. Charles Henderson had done his job, taken her money, disappeared. But now Crane's sources in Cedar Bend were reporting something unexpected. The woman had stayed, and that might complicate things. The first week in Cedar Bend passed in a blur of backbreaking work and nights so exhausted that Abigail fell asleep before her head hit the thin pillow. Mrs. Hargrove, true to her word, found work for her. Washing bed linens for the boarding house, scrubbing floors for the saloon arriving before dawn so she wouldn't be there when the customers started drinking, mending shirts for cowboys who paid her 10 or 15 cents per garment depending on how bad the damage was. She made enough to pay for her room. Barely. On good days, she had enough left over for a meal. On bad days, she went to bed with her stomach growling and her hands cracked and bleeding from the harsh lye soap she used for washing. But she kept her spine straight. That's what her father used to say. Abby girl, you can take away everything from a person except their dignity, and that's only gone if they give it away themselves. So Abigail kept her spine straight. She nodded politely to the women who whispered behind their hands when she passed. She ignored the looks from men who saw a woman alone and thought she might be available for other kinds of work. She showed up when she said she would did the job she was hired to do and asked for nothing she hadn't earned. On the 8th morning, she woke up before dawn as usual and made her way out of town toward Broken Creek. Mrs. Hargrove had mentioned that the apothecary in the next town over would pay good money for certain herbs, especially this time of year when people were starting to prepare for winter ailments. Feverfew grew along creek banks. Yarrow liked open meadows. Abigail had spent her last few pennies on a canvas sack for gathering. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The walk to Broken Creek took the better part of an hour. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, turning it from black to deep purple to a pale, fragile blue. The air was cold enough that Abigail's breath came out in small clouds, and frost sparkled on the grass like scattered diamonds. The creek, when she found it, was everything Mrs. Hargrove had promised. Clear water running over smooth stones. Cottonwoods lining the banks, their leaves turned gold by the autumn weather. And there, growing in thick clusters along the water's edge, exactly what she'd been hoping for. Feverfew, its white flowers just starting to fade. Yarrow tall and tough with flat-topped clusters of tiny blooms. Abigail knelt by the water and began to harvest her hands, moving with the confidence born of years of practice. Her grandmother's voice came back to her, patient and sure. Never take more than a third from any one plant, Abby girl. Leave enough that it can grow back. Provide for the next person who needs it. The sun climbed higher. The frost melted. Birds called to each other in the trees. And somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Abigail's canvas sack slowly filled with herbs that would dry into medicine, into hope, into the means of keeping a roof over her head for another few days. She was so focused on her work that she almost didn't see the horse. It was the sound that caught her attention first. Not the thunder of hooves, but something quieter. A soft snort, the jingle of tack, the creak of leather. Abigail looked up, her hands still full of yarrow stems, and saw the mare standing in the shallows about 20 feet upstream. She was beautiful, black as midnight with a white star on her forehead that caught the morning light. Her coat gleamed like polished obsidian, and the saddle on her back was worked leather with silver conchos that probably cost more than Abigail had made in the past year. But there was no rider. Abigail's father had been a blacksmith, had worked with horses all his life, and he'd taught Abigail one truth that she'd never forgotten. A riderless horse meant trouble. Either the rider had dismounted by choice, or the rider was hurt, or the rider was dead. The smart thing to do would be to collect her herbs and head back to town. Let someone else deal with whatever had happened here. Let someone else take the risk. But Abigail had never been particularly good at doing the smart thing when someone might need help. She set down her gathering sack, stood slowly so she wouldn't spook the mare, and began to move upstream, her eyes scanning the creek bank. The grass was bent in places, showing where something heavy had pushed through. Broken twigs hung from the willow branches. And there, caught on a rock in the middle of the creek, a man's hat, the crown dented and water-stained. Abigail's heart began to beat faster. She found him 10 feet further up the creek, lying face down at the water's edge with one arm stretched toward the water, like he'd been trying to reach it and hadn't quite made it. His coat was good wool, his boots were expensive leather, and the back of his head was matted with blood that had dried to a dark, rusty brown. For one terrible moment, Abigail thought he was dead. Then she saw his back move, just slightly. A breath, shallow and pained, but a breath. She dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands moved to his shoulder, rolling him carefully onto his back. His face was pale beneath a layer of trail dust, his lips cracked and dry. He was older than she'd expected, 35, maybe 40. Dark hair going gray at the temples, lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. A strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble, and his eyes, when they fluttered open for just a moment, were the color of good whiskey, amber and gold and brown all mixed together. "Sir," Abigail said, keeping her voice calm even though her pulse was racing. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes tried to focus on her face, couldn't quite manage it. His lips moved, but no sound came out except a faint groan. Abigail's hands went to the back of his head, felt through his hair until she found the source of the blood. A gash maybe 3 inches long where he'd struck something hard. The skull beneath felt intact. Thank God for small mercies. But the wound was deep enough that it had bled freely. Head wounds always looked worse than they were, her grandmother used to say. But they were nothing to take lightly either. She needed to get him conscious, needed to get him somewhere safe, needed to clean that wound before infection set in. But first she needed to know if he could move, if anything was broken, if internal injuries were going to kill him before she could get help. "Sir," she said again, louder this time, "I need you to wake up. I need you to tell me where you're hurt." His eyes opened again, and this time they stayed open. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression confused, like he couldn't quite figure out where he was or why a strange woman was kneeling beside him with her hands on his face. "Who?" His voice came out as a rasp, barely audible over the sound of the creek. "Who are you?" "My name is Abigail Winters." I found you here by the creek. You've been hurt. Can you tell me what happened? He blinked slowly. His eyes moved past her to the sky to the trees, trying to piece together a story his brain couldn't quite access. Mountain lion, he said finally. Spooked Sable. I fell. Sable's the black mare. That made sense. Mountain lions were common in these parts. A horse spooked a rider thrown a head-hitting rock. Except Abigail's eyes went to the broken branches again, to the boot prints in the mud, to the spent rifle cartridge she'd noticed earlier half buried in silt near the water's edge. Mountain lions didn't carry rifles. Someone had shot near this man's horse, on purpose, to make her bolt, to make him fall. This wasn't an accident. This was attempted murder. But she didn't say that, not yet. Not when he could barely hold his eyes open. Can you move? Abigail asked instead. Fingers, toes. He tried. She watched his hands clench into fists, saw his boots shift in the dirt. Everything seemed to work at least on a basic level. No paralysis then. No broken spine. I think I can sit up. Let me help you. Abigail got her arm under his shoulders, took most of his weight as he struggled into a sitting position. He swayed dangerously, and she had to brace herself to keep him from toppling sideways back into the dirt. Up close, she could smell horse and sweat and blood. And underneath it all, something clean. Soap, maybe, or just the scent of a man who took care of himself. Easy, she murmured. Take your time. You've lost some blood. He raised one hand to the back of his head, winced when his fingers found the wound. When he brought his hand back around, his palm was smeared with red. He stared at it for a moment, then looked at Abigail with those whiskey-colored eyes. You saved my life, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I found you, that's all. But we need to get you back to town. Get a doctor to look at that head. Can you ride with help? Maybe. Abigail looked at the mare still standing patiently in the shallows. Looked at the man beside her who was probably twice her weight and barely conscious. Looked at the distance between the creek and Cedar Bend, which had seemed like a pleasant morning walk an hour ago and now seemed impossible. She could leave him here. Go get help. But that would take time, and time was something they might not have. If he had a concussion, if he started bleeding again, if he slipped back into unconsciousness and couldn't wake up. No, the only option was to get him on that horse and get him to town. Even if it took everything she had. All right, Abigail said. She stood, brushed off her skirt, held out both hands. Take my hands. We're going to get you standing. Then we're going to get you on Sable. And then we're going to get you somewhere safe. Can you do that? For a moment, he just looked at her hands. They were rough from work, the nails chipped, the knuckles red from lye soap. Not the hands of a lady, but they were strong and they were steady. And right now, they were all he had. He reached up and took them. Abigail didn't know it yet, but the man she saved had an enemy who tried to kill him once and wouldn't stop until the job was done. An enemy who'd ordered the shot that spooked Sable, who'd watched from the rocky outcrop as Nathan Holloway's skull cracked against stone, who'd ridden away satisfied that the problem was solved. William Crane didn't know about Abigail Winters, not yet, but he would, and when he did, he'd realize she was a complication, a variable he hadn't accounted for, a woman who had no business being strong enough to lift a grown man onto a horse, no business being skilled enough to stop bleeding with torn petticoat and creek water, no business surviving in a world that should have broken her weeks ago. And William Crane did not tolerate complications. Getting Nathan Holloway onto the horse was an exercise in stubborn determination on both their parts. He was heavy and weak, and twice he nearly passed out from the pain and effort. But Abigail had hauled full water buckets up 3 flights of stairs in the boarding house, had lifted her father after he'd been kicked by a horse and couldn't stand on his own, had learned young that sometimes strength wasn't about muscle. It was about refusing to give up. She got him into the saddle, got the reins in his hands, got her own foot in the stirrup behind him, and pulled herself up, her skirts bunching awkwardly around her legs. Propriety be damned. Hold on, she said in his ear. Just hold on, I'll get us back. His only response was a grunt that might have been agreement or might have been pain. Abigail wrapped one arm around his waist to keep him upright, took the reins in her other hand, and urged Sable into a walk. The journey back to Cedar Bend took twice as long as the walk out had. Abigail had to stop 3 times to let Nathan rest, to make sure he was still breathing, to wipe the fresh blood that seeped from his wound. By the time the buildings of town came into view, the sun was high overhead, and Abigail's entire body ached from the effort of keeping them both in the saddle. But they made it. People stared as they rode down the main street. Cowboys stopped what they were doing to watch. Women came out of the general store, their hands pressed to their mouths. And from the livery stable at the end of town, an old man came running, his face going white when he saw who was on the horse. "Boss," the old man's voice cracked with fear and relief all mixed together. "Dear God, we've been looking for you since yesterday." Where he stopped when he saw Abigail. Really saw her. Saw the blood on her dress and her arms around the injured man. He fell from his horse, Abigail said, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "Hit his head. He needs a doctor." The old man was already reaching up, helping to ease Nathan down from the saddle. 2 younger cowboys appeared from inside the stable, their faces tight with concern, their hands gentle as they supported their boss between them. "Get him to the ranch," the old man barked. "Send someone for Doc Hammond, and for God's sake, be careful with him." They moved quickly, efficiently, like men who knew each other well and didn't need words to coordinate. Within minutes, Nathan was being loaded into a wagon, blankets tucked around him, one of the cowboys climbing up to drive. Abigail started to dismount, her legs shaking with exhaustion. The old man was suddenly there, his weathered hands helping her down, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Miss," he said, "listen, I don't know who you are, but you saved that man's life. That's Nathan Holloway you brought in. He owns the Broken Creek Ranch. Been gone since yesterday morning. We was feared the worst." Nathan Holloway, the name meant nothing to Abigail. But the way the old man said it, with a mixture of respect and affection and relief, told her it meant something to this town, meant something to these people. "I'm glad I could help," Abigail said. She was suddenly aware of how she must look. Dress covered in blood and creek water, hair falling out of its pins, face probably smudged with dirt. The old man was still staring at her. "He say anything to you on the ride back?" "Just that he fell, that a mountain lion spooked his horse." The old man's jaw tightened. "That cat's been causing trouble for weeks. Killed 3 calves last month." He seemed to shake himself, focused back on Abigail. "Where are you staying? Miss Boss is going to want to thank you proper once he's on his feet again." Abigail hesitated. "I'm at Hargrove's boarding house, for now." Something flickered in the old man's eyes. Understanding, maybe, or pity. He'd probably heard about the girl at the train station, the one whose husband never showed. In a town this small, everyone knew everyone else's business. "Right," he said. "Well, miss, you just saved the life of the most important man in 3 counties. That means something. You need anything. Anything at all. You come find me at the Broken Creek. Name's Red Callahan. I'm the foreman there." "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. But I don't need anything. I was just glad I could help." She meant it, but Red Callahan was looking at her the way her grandmother used to look at her when she was being particularly stubborn, with a mixture of exasperation and fondness. "Nathan Holloway ain't the kind of man who forgets a debt," Red said quietly. "You remember that." Then he tipped his hat, climbed up onto the wagon beside the driver, and they were off heading north out of town toward a ranch Abigail had never seen and probably never would. She stood there in the street watching them go until Mrs. Hargrove appeared at her elbow. "Abigail Winters, Mrs." Hargrove said, and there was something almost like approval in her voice. "You've had quite a morning." Abigail looked down at herself, at the blood drying on her dress, at her canvas sack of herbs abandoned somewhere by the creek. She'd need to go back for it if she could find the spot again. Needed those herbs if she was going to make enough money to keep eating. But right now all she wanted was to wash her face and sit down somewhere quiet and let her hands stop shaking. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "Quite a morning." Mrs. Hargrove steered her back toward the boarding house, one hand firm on Abigail's elbow. "Come on, girl. Let's get you cleaned up. And then I think you'd better tell me everything that happened." While Abigail scrubbed blood from her hands in Mrs. Hargrove's kitchen, Red Callahan rode into Cedar Bend on business he'd been putting off for weeks. Business that couldn't wait any longer, now that the boss was laid up and the ranch was running low on operating capital. The Cedar Bend Bank sat on the corner of Main and Fourth, small, unremarkable, but the man behind the desk in the back office was neither. William Augustus Crane had ridden down from Cheyenne that morning, as he did every third Tuesday, inspecting his investments, collecting his debts, maintaining the careful web of loans and foreclosures that had made him one of the wealthiest men in the territory. Red walked in with his hat in his hands and $200 in his pocket, enough to pay the quarterly interest on Nathan's loan. Barely, Crane looked up from his ledger, smiled. "Mr. Callahan, what a pleasant surprise. Need to make a payment on the Holloway account." Red set the money on the desk, counted it out, tried not to let his hands shake with the anger that rose in his throat every time he had to hand this man a single dollar. Crane counted the bills, slow and deliberate, like he was savoring each one. $200, that covers the interest through October. He looked up. "But I'm afraid Mr. Holloway's account is severely strained. The principal payment is due in full on December 24th, $5,000, plus the final quarter's interest. That's $5,225 total. We know the terms. Do you?" Crane leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers. "Because from what I hear, Mr. Holloway had an accident yesterday, a rather serious accident. Is he even capable of running the ranch right now?" Red's jaw clenched. "Boss is fine. He'll be back on his feet in a few days." "I certainly hope so. For your sake, for all your sakes." Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "It would be a shame if something happened to prevent Mr. Holloway from meeting his obligations. The bank would be forced to foreclose. And I'd hate to see Broken Creek Ranch go to auction." Red took the receipt, turned to leave. "Oh, and Mr. Callahan." Crane's voice stopped him at the door. "I heard Nathan was brought in by a woman, a stranger, the mail-order bride who never found her groom. Is that correct?" "Don't know what you heard, but Miss Winters saved the boss's life. That's all that matters." "Miss Winters." Crane wrote the name on a piece of paper. "How interesting. A woman alone. No family, no prospects. I imagine she's quite desperate for employment." "She's got work." "Does she?" Crane looked up. "Because from what I understand, she's washing laundry for pennies. A woman with her resourcefulness could do so much better. Perhaps I should make her an offer." Red's hand tightened on the door handle. "Leave her alone, Crane. I'm merely being helpful, Mr. Callahan. After all, a woman who can save a man's life must have certain skills. Skills that would be valuable to the right employer. Tell Mr. Holloway I hope he recovers swiftly, and tell him December 24th is coming faster than he thinks." Red left without another word, but as he rode back to Broken Creek, one thought circled in his mind like a vulture over carrion. William Crane knew about Abigail, and that meant she was in danger. Red Callahan arrived at Hargrove's boarding house the next morning just as the sun was breaking over the eastern mountains. He sat astride a sturdy buckskin gelding, and behind him, tied to a lead rope, was the black mare Sable. Her coat gleamed in the early light. She'd been brushed until she shone. Abigail was already awake. She'd been awake since before dawn, standing at the small window of her storage room, watching the sky change from black to gray to the pale gold of sunrise. Sleep had been hard to come by. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nathan Holloway's face, pale and blood-streaked. Heard his voice rough and desperate. Felt the weight of him in her arms as she struggled to keep him upright in the saddle. She'd saved a man's life yesterday, a stranger, a man who owned more land than she could probably walk across in a week, who had people depending on him, who mattered in ways she would never matter. And now his foreman was here, sitting easy in the saddle, his weathered face unreadable in the morning light. Abigail stepped out onto the back porch, her shawl wrapped tight against the chill. Red saw her immediately, touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Miss Winters, hope I didn't wake you." "You didn't. I was already up." She moved down the steps, her eyes going to Sable. "Is Mr. Holloway all right?" "Doc Hammond says he'll live. Got a concussion, needs rest, but he's too stubborn to stay in bed for long." Red's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. "He sent me to fetch you." Abigail's stomach did something strange, a flutter that had nothing to do with hunger. "Fetch me to the ranch. Boss wants to thank you proper, and he's got a proposition for you." The word hung in the air between them. Proposition. Abigail had heard that word before. usually from men who thought a woman alone was fair game for all kinds of indecent suggestions. But Red Callahan's face held nothing but respect, and his eyes, when they met hers, were steady and honest. "What kind of proposition?" she asked carefully. "The kind that involves honest work for honest pay. He'll explain when you get there. But Miss Winters, I'm going to tell you straight. Nathan Holloway is a good man, best I've ever known. He don't take advantage. He don't lie. And when he says he owes someone a debt, he means to pay it." Abigail looked at the black mare, at the expensive saddle, at the morning spreading out before her like a gift she hadn't asked for. She could say no, could stay here in her storage room, scrubbing floors and mending shirts for pennies, slowly saving enough to maybe someday have a different life. Or she could take a chance. Again, even though the last time she'd taken a chance on a man's promises, she'd ended up stranded 2,000 miles from home with nothing but 62 cents and a worthless piece of paper. But Red Callahan wasn't promising her marriage. He was promising work. And work was something Abigail understood. "All right," she said, "let me get my things." The ride to Broken Creek Ranch took the better part of an hour. Red kept the pace easy, mindful of the fact that Abigail wasn't an experienced rider. She sat astride behind him on the buckskin, her hands gripping the saddle's cantle, her body stiff with the effort of staying balanced. The land opened up as they left town behind. Rolling hills covered in autumn grass, golden in the slanting light. Cottonwoods lining creeks that ran clear over beds of smooth stone. In the distance, mountains rose purple and majestic against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. It was beautiful. Abigail had seen beauty in Pennsylvania, in the green hills and the covered bridges and the farms that dotted the valleys. But this was different. This was vast and wild, and so open it made her chest ache with something she couldn't name. Red didn't talk much during the ride, and Abigail was grateful for the silence. It gave her time to think, to prepare, to steel herself for whatever was coming. The ranch, when it finally came into view, took her breath away. The house was white, 2 stories tall, with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides like welcoming arms. Real glass windows caught the morning sun and threw it back at the sky. A red barn sat to the left, solid and proud, with corrals spreading out behind it like the spokes of a wheel. Beyond that, pastures rolled toward the horizon, dotted with cattle that moved slow and peaceful through the grass. This wasn't just a ranch. This was an empire, built by someone who knew how to work and how to dream and how to make both those things real. Red guided the buckskin up to the front porch, dismounted, held out a hand to help Abigail down. Her legs were shaky when her feet hit the ground, whether from the ride or from nerves she couldn't quite say. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman stood there, perhaps 60 years old, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple dress covered by a flour-dusted apron. Her hands were red and rough from years of work. "So, you're the girl who saved Nathan's fool hide," the woman said. It wasn't quite a question, wasn't quite an accusation, just a statement of fact delivered in a voice that had probably been giving orders for decades. "This is Myrtle Holloway," Red said. "Nathan's aunt. She runs the house, and half the time she runs the rest of us too." Myrtle's lips twitched. "Don't you forget it." She stepped back, holding the door open. "Come in, child. You look like you could use some coffee and a decent meal." But in Cheyenne, 100 miles east, a prisoner was making a deal that would bring Abigail's past crashing into her future. Charles Henderson sat in a cell in the Laramie County Jail charged with mail fraud and theft. 12 victims across 6 territories. $600 stolen, and a banker from Cheyenne who was very interested in making sure Henderson's testimony never saw the inside of a courtroom. William Crane visited the jail that morning, spoke to Henderson through the bars, made him an offer. "I can get you out, new identity, $500, passage to California. All you have to do is one small job for me when the time comes." "What kind of job?" "There's a woman in Cedar Bend, Abigail Winters, one of yours, I believe. She's become a complication. I need her to disappear, quietly. Can you arrange that?" Henderson thought about it. Thought about $500 in freedom and a chance to start over somewhere the law wouldn't find him. "I can arrange that." They shook hands through the bars, and Abigail Winters, making coffee in Myrtle Holloway's kitchen, had no idea that the man who'd ruined her life once was about to try again. The inside of the house was as impressive as the outside. Polished wooden floors that gleamed like honey. A parlor with leather chairs and a fireplace big enough to stand in. Photographs on the walls. Faces Abigail didn't recognize but could read stories in. A young man and woman on their wedding day, both of them serious and hopeful. The same man, older now, standing beside a horse with a hand on its neck. A child's drawing framed like it was precious. Myrtle led her through to the kitchen, and it was there that Abigail finally felt like she could breathe. This was a working kitchen, not a showpiece. A massive cast iron stove dominated one wall, its surface covered with pots and pans that showed years of use. A table, scarred and sturdy, sat in the center of the room with chairs that didn't match but looked comfortable. Herbs hung from the ceiling beams, drying in bunches that filled the air with the scent of sage and thyme, and something sweet Abigail couldn't quite identify. "Sit," Myrtle commanded, pointing to one of the chairs. "Red, go tell Nathan she's here, and tell him to stay in that bed until I say otherwise." Red grinned. "You tell him that yourself, Myrtle. He don't listen to me. He don't listen to anybody." Myrtle was already moving toward the stove, pouring coffee into a thick ceramic mug, setting it in front of Abigail with a thunk that made the table shake slightly. "But he's alive to not listen, and that's because of you." Abigail wrapped her hands around the mug, felt the warmth seep into her palms. The coffee was strong and hot and exactly what she needed. "I just did what anyone would do." "Anyone didn't do it. You did." Myrtle pulled a pan of biscuits from the oven, set them on the table still steaming. "Eat. You look half-starved." Abigail wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, but her stomach betrayed her, growling loud enough that both women heard it. Myrtle's expression softened just slightly. "Go on. Plenty more where those came from." The biscuit was perfect, flaky and buttery and still warm from the oven. Abigail ate it slowly, making it last, aware of Myrtle watching her with those sharp eyes that seemed to see right through to her bones. "Red says Nathan's got a proposition for you," Myrtle said after a moment. "You know what it is?" "No, ma'am." "He wants to hire you as a housekeeper. Help me with the cooking and cleaning and such. Lord knows I could use it. This house is too big for one old woman. And Nathan won't hire anyone I don't approve of." Abigail's hand stilled on the mug. "Why would he hire me? He doesn't know me. He knows you saved his life, knows you didn't leave him to die by that creek when you could have just kept walking. That tells him all he needs to know about your character." Myrtle refilled Abigail's coffee without being asked. "Question is, do you want the job? Did she want it?" Abigail thought of the storage room at Hargrove's, barely big enough to turn around in. Thought of her hands raw from lye soap. Thought of the weeks and months and maybe years it would take to save enough money to build any kind of future. "What would the boss pay?" she asked, because she'd learned long ago that hope without practical details was just another kind of foolishness. $10 a month, room and board included. Your own room upstairs. Proper bed. Door that locks. 3 meals a day. Sundays off if you want them, though. There's always work needs doing on a ranch. $10. Abigail had been making maybe $3 a month at the boarding house, and that was on good weeks. $10 would be more money than she'd ever had in her life. "Why so much?" The words came out before she could stop them. "That's generous, ma'am. More than generous." Myrtle's expression went hard for a moment, like Abigail had insulted her somehow. Then it softened again, and what replaced it was something almost like respect. "You just saved my nephew's life, child. You think that's worth $10 a month?" She shook her head. "Nathan wanted to give you $50 outright as a reward. I told him that would insult you. Told him you'd rather earn your keep than take charity. Was I wrong?" Abigail's throat went tight. No, Myrtle wasn't wrong. The idea of taking $50 for doing what any decent person would do made her skin crawl. But work, honest work, for honest pay. That was different. "You weren't wrong," she said quietly. "Then the job's yours if you want it. But I'm going to tell you straight, same as Red did. This ain't charity. You'll work hard. I expect things done right, done on time, and done without complaining. Can you handle that?" Abigail met Myrtle's eyes. "Yes, ma'am, I can." "Then welcome to Broken Creek Ranch, Abigail Winters." Abigail returned to Hargrove's that afternoon to collect her few belongings. Mrs. Hargrove stood on the porch watching as Abigail packed her carpet bag in the tiny storage room. You found something better then, Mrs. Hargrove said. It wasn't a question. I found honest work, thanks to you giving me a place to start. Abigail looked at the woman who'd shown her the first kindness in Cedar Bend. I won't forget that, ma'am. You're a good girl, Abigail Winters. That ranch is lucky to have you. The next 3 days passed in a blur of learning. Abigail rose before dawn each morning helping Myrtle prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. She learned which cowboys took their coffee black and which wanted it light. Learned that Red had a sweet tooth for Myrtle's biscuits. Learned the rhythm of a working ranch, the constant flow of men and horses and cattle that never quite stopped. She scrubbed floors that gleamed like honey, washed windows until they sparkled, organized the pantry according to Myrtle's exacting standards, and slowly the house began to feel less foreign. The room upstairs began to feel like hers. Nathan remained in bed following doctor's orders for once in his life, though Myrtle reported he was restless and asking questions, asking about her. On the morning of the fourth day, Abigail was in the parlor on her knees scrubbing the floor when she heard the creak of stairs. She looked up and saw a boy standing at the top of the staircase. He was perhaps 8 years old, thin, with dark hair that stuck up in all directions and eyes the same whiskey color as Nathan Holloway's. He wore patched trousers and a shirt 2 sizes too big, and in his hands he held a slate board. He didn't speak, just stared at her with those 2 old eyes. Then he turned and disappeared down the hallway. That's Tommy, Myrtle said from the kitchen doorway. Nathan's nephew. Been living here since his parents died last year. Cholera took them both inside 3 days. She dried her hands on her apron. Boy hasn't spoken a word since. Doctors say it's permanent. Some kind of shock from seeing his mama pass. He communicates with that slate board and head nods. Feeds the horses. That's about all he does. Abigail looked at the empty staircase. Does he go to school? Used to, but the other children made fun of him for not talking. Nathan pulled him out, hired a tutor for a while, but Tommy wouldn't cooperate. Just sits in the barn most days talking to the horses. Myrtle's voice went soft. Poor thing, lost everything. And Nathan's doing his best, but he don't know how to reach him. Don't know how to help. Abigail thought of her grandmother, of the selective mutism cases she'd seen at the Pennsylvania mill. Children who'd witnessed violence or trauma and simply stopped speaking. May I try, she asked. To reach him, I mean. Myrtle studied her. You know something about this, about children who don't talk? A little. My grandmother treated similar cases, said it was the mind's way of protecting itself, that forcing them to speak made it worse. But sometimes the right kind of patience could bring them back. Well, Myrtle handed her a basket. Tommy's in the barn. If you're going out there anyway, take him this. Myrtle's famous biscuits. Maybe he'll eat something for once. While Abigail walked toward the barn with a basket of biscuits, Red Callahan was riding the north pasture fence line checking for damage after yesterday's windstorm. He found damage all right, but not from wind. 15 cattle lay dead by the waterhole, their bodies already stiff with rigor mortis, foam crusted around their mouths, eyes bulged and glassy. Red dismounted, approached carefully, knelt beside the nearest cow, and that's when he saw it. Nightshade berries floating in the waterhole. Hundreds of them. Fresh. Someone had dumped them in deliberately sometime in the last 12 hours. Red's blood went cold. Nightshade didn't grow naturally in these parts. Someone had brought it here, had crushed the berries, had poisoned the water on purpose. He stood, scanned the area, and found the boot print. Size 12, Eastern-made heel, not cowboy boots, banker's shoes. Red pulled his rifle from the saddle scabbard, checked the surrounding hills. Nothing moved except grass in the wind. But whoever did this was long gone, and they'd made their point. Nathan Holloway was vulnerable, and so was everyone who worked for him. Abigail found Tommy in the barn sitting on a hay bale watching a mare and her foal in the nearby stall. He didn't look up when she approached, just kept his eyes on the horses, his slate board balanced on his knees. Hello, Tommy, Abigail said softly. I'm Abigail. I'm helping your Aunt Myrtle in the house. No response. She set the basket on the hay bale beside him. She sent me out with biscuits. I don't know if you're hungry, but they're still warm. I tested one. She's an excellent baker. Tommy's eyes flicked to the basket, then back to the horses. Abigail didn't push, just stood there breathing in the smell of hay and horse and leather, the same smells that had filled her father's blacksmith shop. My father worked with horses, she said, back in Pennsylvania. He was a blacksmith. He used to say that horses were better company than most people. Didn't judge, didn't lie, just were. Tommy's hand moved on the slate, but he didn't show her what he'd written. He taught me that you can learn a lot about a person by how they treat animals, especially when they think no one's watching. She gestured to the mare and foal. You're gentle with them. That tells me you're gentle inside, even if the world hasn't been gentle with you. Tommy looked up at her then, really looked. His eyes were the same color as Nathan's, but there was something else there. Something wounded and wary and so achingly lonely that it made Abigail's chest tight. He held up his slate. You smell like Mama. Abigail blinked, felt something hot behind her eyes. What did your mama smell like? Tommy erased the words, wrote new ones. Lavender soap. She made it herself, from flowers in the garden. I use lavender soap too, Abigail said. It was the only thing I could afford at the general store. But if it reminds you of your mama, I can use something else. I don't want to make you sad. Tommy shook his head hard, wrote again. Don't change. It makes me remember the good parts. Abigail sat down on the hay bale, not too close, giving him space. Would you tell me about her, the good parts? For a long moment, Tommy just stared at his slate. Then he started writing. And Abigail read about a woman who made apple butter every fall, who sang hymns while she worked, who told Tommy stories about his great-grandmother who'd come west in a covered wagon, a woman who'd loved her son fierce and bright, until cholera took her in 3 days, just like Myrtle said. When Tommy finally stopped writing, his hands were shaking. Abigail didn't touch him, didn't try to hug him or comfort him physically, just sat there present and steady. Thank you for telling me about her, she said. She sounds like someone I would have liked very much. Tommy nodded, erased the slate, wrote one more thing. Uncle Nathan tries, but he's sad too. I know, Abigail said. Sometimes grown-ups don't know how to fix sadness. Not their own and definitely not someone else's. But that doesn't mean they don't care. Tommy looked at the basket, reached for a biscuit, took a bite, and Abigail felt something shift. Some small crack in the wall he'd built around himself. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Red burst into the kitchen an hour later, his face grim. Myrtle, where's Abigail? Barn with Tommy. Why, what's wrong? Get her now and tell Nathan I need him downstairs. I don't care if Doc Hammond says otherwise. 5 minutes later, they were all gathered in the parlor. Nathan on the sofa, pale but upright. Myrtle hovering, Red pacing, Abigail standing by the window with Tommy behind her, one hand gripping her skirt. 15 cattle dead, Red said without preamble. North pasture, poisoned. Nathan's jaw clenched. You sure nightshade berries in the water hole? In this. Red pulled a folded bandana from his pocket, opened it carefully to reveal crushed purple-black berries. Abigail stepped forward, looked at the berries. Her grandmother's training kicked in automatically. Atropa belladonna, she said. Deadly nightshade. Causes dilated pupils foam at the mouth seizures. Death within hours if enough is ingested. Everyone turned to stare at her. How do you know that? Nathan asked. My grandmother was a midwife. She taught me about plants. The ones that heal and the ones that kill. This one kills. Red nodded. Found a boot print, size 12, Eastern heel, not cowboy boots. Crane, Nathan said. That'd be my guess. Wait. Abigail looked between them. Who's Crane? Nathan met her eyes. William Crane, banker from Cheyenne. I owe him $5,000. Due December 24th, 90 days from now. He stood despite Myrtle's protest. This wasn't random. This was a message. He's telling me he can hurt me, hurt the ranch, hurt everyone who works here. Why would he do that? Abigail asked. Because he wants this land, has for years, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to get it. Red pulled something else from his pocket, a spent rifle cartridge. Found this by Broken Creek, where you found the boss. Same caliber Crane's men carry. Abigail's blood went cold. The mountain lion didn't spook your horse. No, Nathan said. Someone shot near Sable, on purpose, to make me fall, to kill me. He looked at Abigail. And you saved my life. Which means Crane knows about you now, which means you're in danger too. Tommy's hand tightened on Abigail's skirt. How much danger, she asked. Nathan didn't answer, but the look on his face said everything. The kind of danger that ended with nightshade berries and water holes. The kind of danger that ended with bullets and broken skulls and bodies left by creek banks. The kind of danger that didn't stop until everyone in the way was dead. That night, Abigail lay in her new bed in her new room, in a house that suddenly felt less like sanctuary and more like a target. She thought about the marriage certificate still tucked in her Bible, about Charles Henderson and his false promises, about how she'd come west looking for a new life and found nothing but lies. But this was different. This wasn't disappointment. This wasn't heartbreak. This was survival. And as she listened to the wind rattling the windows and Tommy crying softly in the room next door, Abigail made a decision. She would stay, would fight, would protect this broken family that had shown her more kindness in 4 days than the world had shown her in 30 years. She didn't know yet that William Crane was already planning his next move, that Charles Henderson was being released from jail with orders to make her disappear, that the boot print by the waterhole belonged to a man who'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to kill again. She didn't know that in 3 days the town of Cedar Bend would learn her secret, would discover the truth about why she'd really left Pennsylvania, would have to choose between protecting her or throwing her to the wolves. All she knew was this: Nathan Holloway had given her a job when she had nothing. Tommy had shown her his mother's memory. Myrtle had called her child, like she meant it. And Abigail Winters had learned long ago that family wasn't about blood. It was about who stood beside you when the darkness came. So when it came, and it would come, she'd be ready. The next morning dawned cold and gray with clouds pressing low over the mountains like a warning. Abigail woke to the sound of men shouting in the yard below her window. She dressed quickly, her fingers clumsy on the buttons of her work dress, and hurried downstairs. The kitchen was already in chaos. Myrtle stood at the stove, her face tight with worry. Red was at the table gulping coffee like it was medicine. And Nathan, who should have been in bed, was pulling on his coat with movements that spoke of barely controlled fury. "What's happened?" Abigail asked. Red looked up, his weathered face grim. "Another poisoning. 35 cattle this time. South pasture water tank." Nathan's jaw clenched. "That's 50 total. $1,000 in losses. And I've got 86 days to pay Crane 5,000. He turned to Red. "Get the hands to drain every water source on the property. Check them all for contamination. And postguards. 2 men per pasture rotating shifts. Anyone sees anything suspicious, they shoot first and ask questions later." "Boss, that'll take every man we got. Won't be anyone left to work the ranch." "I don't care. I'm not losing another animal to that son of a—" Nathan stopped, seemed to remember Abigail was in the room. "Apologies, Miss Winters. My language." "I've heard worse in textile mills," Abigail said. "And please call me Abigail." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes. But before he could respond, a new sound cut through the morning air. A child crying, no, not crying, screaming, high and terrified and coming from upstairs. Abigail moved without thinking, up the stairs 2 at a time, down the hallway, to the room at the end where Tommy slept. She found him tangled in his sheets, thrashing. His face was flushed bright red, his skin burning to the touch. Foam flecked the corners of his mouth. "Tommy." Abigail dropped to her knees beside the bed, put her hand on his forehead, pulled it back instantly from the heat. 103 degrees, maybe higher. Behind her, Nathan appeared in the doorway, saw Tommy, went white. "No, not again, not like Daniel and Mary." "This isn't cholera," Abigail said, her mind racing through her grandmother's teachings. "Look at his pupils, dilated, and the foam, same as the cattle." Understanding hit Nathan like a fist. He drank from one of the tanks. "Yesterday, I saw him fill his canteen at the south pasture." "How much water?" "I don't know, a few sips. That might be enough." Abigail stood. "Where's the nearest doctor?" "Doc Hammond, 20 miles east, but the creek flooded last night from the rain. Roads are washed out. He can't get here." Myrtle pushed into the room, her face stricken. "Sweet Jesus. Not Tommy, please, not Tommy." Abigail looked at the pulse convulsing on the bed. looked at Nathan's face already preparing for loss, looked at Myrtle's hands twisted in her apron. She thought of her grandmother, of the glass jar in her carpet bag, of 3 generations of midwives who'd faced impossible situations and refused to break. "I can help him," she said. All 3 of them turned to stare. "I need my things, the jar in my carpet bag, and I need yarrow fresh if you have it, willow bark, clean water, ice if there's any in the cellar, and I need everyone out of this room except Myrtle." Nathan didn't move. "Miss Winters, if you're not certain—" "I am certain." Abigail met his eyes. "My grandmother delivered 300 babies, treated hundreds more for fever and poisoning and every ailment you can name. She never lost a patient to Nightshade because she taught me exactly what to do. But I need you to trust me, and I need you to move. Now." For one long moment, Nathan just looked at her. Then he nodded. "Red, get her things. Myrtle, help her with whatever she needs." He started to leave, then turned back. "Save him. Please." "I will." The next 6 hours were the longest of Abigail's life. She worked with the methodical precision her grandmother had drilled into her. Mixed feverfew and yarrow into a tea strong enough to counteract the alkaloids in Nightshade. Forced it down Tommy's throat, sip by sip, holding his jaw when he tried to fight. Packed him in ice to bring down the fever. Monitored his pulse, his breathing, his pupils, and talked to him. Constant, steady. Her voice the only anchor in his delirium. "Stay with me, Tommy. I know it hurts. I know you're scared. But your mama didn't raise a quitter, and your Uncle Nathan is counting on you. So you stay. You hear me? You stay." Myrtle hovered at first, wringing her hands, then found her purpose, bringing fresh water, clean cloths, more ice, moving with the efficiency of someone grateful to have a task. Nathan stood in the hallway outside. Abigail could hear him pacing, back and forth, the sound of a man who'd lost too much already and couldn't bear to lose more. By noon, Tommy's fever broke. By 2 o'clock, his pupils returned to normal size. By 4, he opened his eyes, looked at Abigail, and reached for his slate board on the nightstand. His hands shook so badly he could barely write. "You saved me." "We saved each other," Abigail said, her own hands trembling now that the crisis was past. "You're stronger than the poison. Stronger than you know." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. He erased the slate, wrote again. "Thank you, Mama." Abigail's breath caught. "Mama, not Miss Abigail, not Miss Winters. Mama." She looked at Myrtle standing in the doorway with her hand over her mouth. At Nathan behind her, his face carved from stone, but his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You should rest now," Abigail said to Tommy, her voice not quite steady. "You're going to feel weak for a few days, but you'll be all right, I promise." Tommy nodded, his eyes already closing. Within minutes, he was asleep. Real sleep this time, not the thrashing delirium of poison and fever. Abigail stood, her legs nearly gave out. Myrtle caught her elbow. "Easy, child. When's the last time you ate?" "I don't remember." "Come on, kitchen, food, now." But Nathan stepped into the room before they could leave, looked at Tommy sleeping peaceful, looked at the glass jar on the nightstand still half full of dried herbs, looked at Abigail. "You're a healer." "My grandmother was a healer. I'm just someone who paid attention." "No." Nathan's voice was rough. "You're someone who just saved my nephew's life with knowledge most people don't have, with skills that are worth more than gold in this territory." He picked up the ware, studied it. "This is what was in your carpet bag. The secret." Abigail nodded. Feverfew for headaches and inflammation, yarrow for fever and wounds, comfrey for bruises and broken bones. My grandmother's legacy. "Why didn't you tell anyone when you first came to town? You could have set up practice, made real money." "Because women who know too much about healing get called witches," Abigail said. "Or worse. And a woman alone with no husband claiming to cure sickness in a town that already thinks I'm a scandal. They'd run me out before I could help anyone." Nathan set down the jar carefully. "Not anymore. Not after this. Everyone on this ranch knows what you did today. And I'm going to make sure everyone in Cedar Bend knows too." "Nathan, no, you saved my life by that creek. You saved Tommy today. You're not hiding your skills anymore. This territory needs healers, and you're one of the best I've ever seen." He held out his hand. "Thank you, Abigail, for everything." She took his hand, felt the warmth of his grip, the calluses that matched her own, the steadiness that came from a man who kept his word. "You're welcome." And in that moment, something shifted between them. Some recognition that they were both survivors, both fighters, both people who'd lost too much but refused to give up. Myrtle cleared her throat. "Food, now, before you both fall over." While Abigail ate stew and fresh bread in Myrtle's kitchen, William Crane sat in his Cheyenne office reading a telegram. "Boy survived. Woman is healer. Situation complicated." Crane crumpled the paper, threw it into the fireplace. Complicated. Everything about this had become complicated. First, Nathan Holloway survived the fall that should have killed him. Then this woman, this mail-order bride, who had no business being competent at anything, saved him. Now she'd saved the boy too, with herbs and knowledge that made her valuable, made her someone the ranch would protect, made her harder to eliminate, but not impossible. Crane opened his desk drawer, pulled out a file marked Winters Abigail. His sources in Pennsylvania had been thorough. Mill worker, father deceased, mother deceased, no family. But there was more. A factory fire in Allentown 18 months ago, a foreman dead, a trial. Testimony from a worker named Abigail Winters that had sent 3 men to prison for arson and murder, and a notation in the margin handwritten. Witness fled state after receiving threats. Current location unknown. Crane smiled. So Miss Winters had secrets, dangerous secrets, the kind that could get her killed if the right people found out where she was. And Crane knew exactly the right people to tell. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, began to write. 3 days later, the Cedar Bend Gazette ran a story that made Abigail's hands shake when she read it. Mail order fraud victim now at Holloway Ranch. Miss Abigail Winters recently arrived in Cedar Bend under false pretenses involving a mail-order marriage scheme has taken employment at Broken Creek Ranch. Sources report Miss Winters claimed to be meeting a husband who does not exist, raising questions about her true motives for traveling west. Further investigation reveals Miss Winters worked in a Pennsylvania textile mill before her sudden departure from that state. The nature of her departure remains unclear, though sources suggest involvement in labor disputes and possible criminal testimony. Ranch owner Nathan Holloway could not be reached for comment. Readers are reminded that moral character is paramount in our community, and those who associate with persons of questionable background do so at their own risk. The article went on, but Abigail couldn't read anymore. The words blurred as she stared at the paper in Myrtle's kitchen. Someone had been digging. Someone knew about the trial, about the testimony, about the 3 men who'd sworn revenge before the judge sent them to prison. "That bastard," Nathan said from the doorway. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, took the newspaper from her hands, read it himself, his jaw clenched tighter with every line. "This is Crane's doing. Has to be. Anonymous sources, convenient timing. He's trying to destroy your reputation, so I'll fire you." "It's working," Abigail's voice came out flat. "You should fire me, before this damages the ranch's reputation too." "Not a chance. Nathan, you don't understand. Those men in Pennsylvania, the ones I testified against, they have connections. If they find out where I am, then they'll have to go through me." Nathan tossed the paper in the stove, watched it catch fire, and read, "And every man on this ranch, you're under our protection now, whether you like it or not." Myrtle handed Abigail a cup of coffee. "Child, that article is chicken scratch, gossip and innuendo. Anyone with half a brain can see through it." "Half a brain doesn't describe most of Cedar Bend," Abigail said. She was right. By Sunday, the town had chosen sides. Martha Keene organized a church meeting for after services. Abigail wasn't invited, but Nathan was. He came back 2 hours later, his face like thunder. "They took a vote," he said, 12-8. "You're allowed to stay in town, for now. But Martha made it clear she's watching you. Any more scandal, any hint of impropriety, and she'll push for you to be run out." "I should leave," Abigail said. "Go somewhere else. Start over." "You've already started over. Here, with us." Nathan looked at her. "Unless you want to go. If you do, I'll give you enough money to get anywhere you want. No strings. But if you stay as part of this family, and we protect our own. Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway, walked to Abigail, took her hand. He'd been following her everywhere since the poisoning, like a shadow, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let her out of his sight. He held up his slate. Please don't go. Abigail looked at the boy, at Nathan, at Myrtle, who taught her to make biscuits the right way, at the house that had felt more like home in 2 weeks than anywhere had felt in 10 years. I'll stay, she said, until you tell me to leave. That'll be never then, Myrtle said. The meeting with William Crane happened on Thursday. Abigail and Myrtle had gone to town for supplies. They were loading bags of flour into the wagon when a carriage pulled up. Black lacquer, chrome fixtures, pulled by two matched grays that probably cost more than most families made in a year. The door opened, and William Augustus Crane stepped out. He was tall, well-dressed, maybe 55, with gray hair slicked back and a face that might have been handsome if not for the coldness in his eyes. He wore a suit that screamed money and authority, and when he looked at Abigail, she felt something crawl down her spine. Mrs. Myrtle Holloway, Crane said, tipping his hat, and this must be the famous Miss Winters, the woman who saved Nathan's life. His voice was smooth, cultured, the voice of a man used to getting what he wanted. I'm Abigail Winters, she said, kept her voice level. William Crane, I'm a business associate of your employer. I wanted to introduce myself properly. He held out a gloved hand. Abigail didn't take it. Crane's smile didn't falter. He lowered his hand. I also wanted to apologize for the unfortunate article in the Gazette. Small-town gossip can be so vicious. I do hope it hasn't caused you too much distress. I'll survive, Abigail said. I'm certain you will. You strike me as a woman of considerable resilience. His eyes moved over her, assessing. In fact, I wanted to make you an offer. I'm employed, Mr. Crane. Yes, as a housekeeper. Surely a woman of your talents could do better. I have several business interests in Cheyenne, medical establishments that could use someone with your knowledge of herbs and healing. I'd be willing to pay $20 a month, plus room and board in the city. $20. Twice what Nathan was paying her. Myrtle made a sound like a cat hissing. Miss Winters is happy where she is, Crane. You can take your offer and... I'm content at Broken Creek, Abigail said, cutting Myrtle off before she could finish that sentence. Thank you for the offer, but I must decline. Crane's smile thinned. Contentment is a luxury, Miss Winters, one that doesn't last long in this territory, especially for women in vulnerable positions. Is that a threat, Mr. Crane? Merely an observation. Wyoming can be dangerous. Accidents happen, reputations are destroyed, lives are ruined. It would be a shame if you found yourself caught in the crossfire of Nathan Holloway's financial difficulties. He stepped closer, close enough that Abigail could smell his cologne. Expensive, cloying. Think about my offer. When Nathan defaults on his loan and he will default, that ranch will be mine. Everyone who works there will be out of a job. But you, Miss Winters, could have a secure future. All you have to do is say yes. And all I have to do is say no, Abigail replied. So no, Mr. Crane. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do. She turned to load the last bag of flour. Crane's hand shot out, grabbed her wrist. I don't think you understand the situation, miss. He didn't finish the sentence, because Myrtle Holloway had produced a derringer from somewhere in her skirts and was now pointing it at Crane's head. Let go of her now. Crane released Abigail's wrist, stepped back. His face had gone red. This is assault, Mrs. Holloway. I could have you arrested. Go ahead and try. Sheriff Thompson's my second cousin, and he don't take kindly to men who threaten women in his town. Crane straightened his coat, his mask of civility slipping to show the rage underneath. You're making a mistake, all of you. Nathan Holloway is finished, and everyone loyal to him will go down with him. Remember that. He climbed back into his carriage, slammed the door. As the carriage pulled away, Abigail's hands started shaking. Well, Myrtle said, tucking the derringer back into her skirts. That went about as well as expected. He's going to hurt us, Abigail said. All of us. Probably, but we hurt back harder. That's the Holloway way. That night, Abigail couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Crane's words. His eyes, the way he'd looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. Around midnight, she gave up, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and padded downstairs to the kitchen. and found Nathan already there. He sat at the table, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his feet bare. He looked up when she entered. "Can't sleep either." "Too much thinking," Abigail said. "I know the feeling." She poured herself coffee, sat across from him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Nathan said, "Red told me about Crane, about what he said to you. He made me an offer, $20 a month. And you turned him down. Did you think I wouldn't?" Nathan looked at her over the rim of his cup. "I think you're the kind of person who makes choices based on principle, not profit. But I also think you deserve to know what you're choosing." He set down his coffee. "That loan, the $5,000 I owe Crane, I took it out last year to expand the herd, buy breeding stock, build up the ranch. It was a good investment. Should have paid itself back in 2 years. But my brother Daniel did a survey of the property 6 months ago, found something that changed everything." Nathan stood, walked to his study, came back with a folded paper. He spread it on the table. Abigail leaned forward, saw a hand-drawn map of the ranch, creek lines, property boundaries, and there marked in red ink a vein running diagonal across the northwest section. "Silver," Nathan said. "Daniel estimated it's worth $2 million. Abigail's breath caught. $2 million. He died a week after making this map. Him and his wife Mary. Cholera, the doctor said. 3 days from healthy to dead." Nathan's finger traced the silver vein. "I never believed it was cholera. Daniel and Mary were strong, young. They shouldn't have died like that. But I had no proof. No reason to suspect anything except bad luck and disease." "Until the cattle poisoning," Abigail said. "Until the cattle poisoning." Nathan looked up. "Crane offered me the loan 1 week after Daniel's funeral. Showed up at the service, gave his condolences. Then mentioned he'd heard I might need capital to keep the ranch running with Daniel gone. He knew about the silver. I think he's known about it for months, maybe years. Been waiting for the chance to take this land. And when Daniel discovered the vein Crane had him killed, made it look like disease." Abigail thought of Tommy, of his selective mutism, of the trauma that had stolen his voice. "Does Tommy know?" "I don't know. He was there when his parents died, found his mother's body. The doctor said the shock was what made him stop talking." Nathan's jaw clenched. If Crane killed them, if Tommy saw or heard something, that boy's been living with that knowledge for 18 months. Alone, silent, terrified. He looked at Abigail. "You're helping him. I see it. The way he follows you, the way he called you mama. You're reaching him in ways I never could." "I'm trying. It's working." And that scares Crane. Because a healer who can cure poison, who can reach a traumatized child, who saves lives and keeps records and pays attention, that's dangerous to a man trying to commit murder. Nathan reached across the table, took her hand. "You need to know what you're up against. Crane isn't going to stop. He's going to escalate. Newspaper articles are just the beginning. He'll use violence if he has to, and anyone standing between him and this ranch is a target." His hand was warm, rough with calluses, strong. "So I'm asking you one more time. Do you want to leave? I'll protect you as much as I can, but I can't promise your safety. Not with Crane involved." Abigail looked at their joined hands, at the silver vein on the map, at the window where she could see the first hint of dawn. "My grandmother used to say something," she said. She'd say, "Abby girl, the safest place in a storm isn't where the wind can't reach you. It's with people who'll stand beside you when it hits." That's what she told me when my father was dying, when we had nothing, when the world seemed like it was ending. She met Nathan's eyes. "I've been alone for 7 years, since my father died. I've worked myself to exhaustion, saved every penny, trusted a man who turned out to be a lie, lost everything and had to start over with 62 cents and a prayer." Her hand tightened on his. "But here in this house with you and Myrtle and Tommy, I don't feel alone. I feel like I'm part of something, like I matter, and I'm not walking away from that. Not for Crane, not for anyone." Nathan's eyes went dark, intense. "You matter, Abigail, more than you know." The air between them changed, became charged, electric. Abigail should pull her hand back, should stand up, should remember she was the housekeeper and he was her employer, and there were lines that shouldn't be crossed. But she didn't move. Neither did Nathan. They sat there as dawn broke over the mountains, hands joined across a kitchen table. The map of a murdered brother's discovery spread between them, and something that had been building for 2 weeks finally quietly took root. Later that morning, Abigail found Myrtle in the garden trying to harvest vegetables but moving like every joint hurt. "Let me help," Abigail said. "I'm fine, child, just a little stiff." "You're in pain, I can see it." Myrtle straightened slowly, her face was tight. "Arthritis? Had it for years. Gets worse when the weather changes. There's nothing to be done." "There might be." Abigail thought of her grandmother's recipes, the ones for inflammation and joint pain. Yarrow compress or comfrey. Both are good for arthritis, if you'll let me try. Myrtle studied her. "You really think it'll help?" "I think it's worth trying, and if it works, I'll teach you how to make it yourself." "All right then. Can't hurt worse than it already does." That afternoon, Abigail made the compress, wrapped Myrtle's swollen hands in cloth soaked with yarrow and comfrey tea, added a few drops of lavender oil for the pain. Within an hour, Myrtle was flexing her fingers with something like wonder. "Sweet Jesus, I can move them. No grinding, no fire in the joints." She looked at Abigail with tears in her eyes. "How long have you known how to do this?" "Since I was 12, my grandmother taught me." "And you've been keeping it to yourself, why?" "Because in most places, women who heal too well get called witches, or charlatans, or worse." Myrtle made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sob. "Not here, here your family, and family doesn't hide their gifts." She pulled Abigail into a fierce hug. "Thank you, child, for this, for Tommy, for everything." Tommy found the full map 3 days later. He was helping Abigail clean Nathan's study, as he'd taken to doing whenever she worked. Moving quiet as a shadow, useful in the way 8-year-old boys can be when they're trying to be helpful. He was dusting Nathan's desk when he knocked over a ledger. Papers scattered across the floor. Abigail moved to help pick them up. And that's when she saw it. Another map, larger than the first one Nathan had shown her. More detailed. This one showed the entire Broken Creek property. Every creek, every pasture, every building. And the silver vein didn't just run through the northwest section. It ran under the house, under the barn, under nearly every structure on the ranch. Whoever owned this land owned a fortune. Tommy picked up the map, stared at it. His whole body went rigid. Abigail knelt beside him. "Tommy, what's wrong?" He was breathing fast. Too fast, his eyes fixed on a notation in the corner of the map. "Survey completed August 14th, 1882. D. Holloway." 1 week before his parents died. Tommy's hands started shaking. The map fluttered to the floor. He grabbed his slate, started writing. Fast, frantic, his handwriting barely legible. "Papa showed this to a man, erase. Write again. The man came to our house, erase. Write. I was in bed, heard them talking. The man said Papa couldn't tell anyone about the silver. Erase it. Right, his hands shaking harder. Papa said he had to tell Uncle Nathan. It was Uncle Nathan's land. Erase. Right. The man said that would be a mistake." Tommy dropped the slate, pressed his hands over his ears, like he could block out a conversation that happened 18 months ago. Abigail wrapped her arms around him. "It's okay, you're safe, I got you." But Tommy was shaking his head, rocking, making sounds that might have been words if he could remember how to speak. Nathan appeared in the doorway. "What happened?" "He remembered something," Abigail said, "about the night before his parents died. Someone threatened Daniel, someone who knew about the silver." Nathan crossed the room in 2 strides, knelt beside them. "Tommy, look at me." Tommy's eyes were wild, terrified. "Did you see this man? The one who talked to your father?" Tommy nodded. "Do you know who he was?" Tommy reached for his slate with shaking hands, wrote one word, Crane. William Crane received the telegram at exactly noon. "Boy remembers, investigation likely. Recommend immediate action." He burned the telegram, poured himself a bourbon, stared out his office window at Cheyenne's main street. The boy remembered. 16 months of silence, and now the little bastard remembered. That was the problem with witnesses, even traumatized ones. They always found their voice eventually, usually at the worst possible time. Crane had thought killing Daniel and Mary Holloway would be enough. Make it look like disease. Nothing suspicious, just bad luck and cholera. But he'd underestimated Nathan Holloway's stubbornness, underestimated the loyalty of the ranch hands, underestimated the healer who'd appeared out of nowhere and started saving lives and asking questions. He needed a new plan, something permanent, something that would eliminate all the problems at once. Crane opened his desk drawer, pulled out 3 files. Nathan Holloway, Abigail Winters, Thomas Holloway. He laid them side by side. Then he wrote a letter to a man in Laramie, a man who specialized in making problems disappear. The letter was brief, 3 targets, ranch location attached, use discretion, no witnesses. Payment on completion, $2,000. He sealed the envelope, called for his secretary. Post this, express delivery. By nightfall, the letter would be in Laramie. By tomorrow, the killer would be on his way to Broken Creek. And within the week, Nathan Holloway's ranch would be empty, ready for foreclosure, ready for Crane to take what should have been his all along. Nathan made the decision that night. We're going to Cheyenne tomorrow, you, me, and Red. We're going to find the doctor who signed Daniel and Mary's death certificates. And we're going to make him tell the truth. That's dangerous, Abigail said. If Crane finds out, then he finds out. I'm done playing defense. It's time to fight back. They left at dawn. Myrtle stayed behind with Tommy and instructions to shoot anyone who came to the house who wasn't supposed to be there. I'll protect him, Myrtle said, patting the Derringer in her apron pocket. You just come back safe. The train to Cheyenne took 3 hours. Abigail sat by the window watching the landscape blur past, felt Nathan's presence beside her solid and steady, felt the weight of what they were doing. If they found proof that Crane had murdered Daniel and Mary, it would be war. If they didn't find proof, they'd have shown their hand for nothing. The doctor's office was on the east side of town, a small building with peeling paint and a sign that read, Dr. Edmund Walsh General Practice. Inside, the waiting room was empty. The doctor himself appeared within minutes. He was perhaps 45 with thinning hair and the kind of nervous energy that came from too much coffee and not enough sleep. Mr. Holloway, I heard about your accident. How can I help you? You can tell me the truth about my brother's death. Walsh's face went carefully blank. Daniel Holloway died of cholera. I signed the death certificate myself. There's nothing more to tell. Cholera that killed him and his wife in 3 days. Cholera that showed up in August, months after the cholera season. Cholera that somehow didn't spread to anyone else in Cedar Bend, even though they'd been in town the day before they died. Nathan stepped closer. I don't believe it was cholera, Dr. Walsh, and I think you don't believe it either. Walsh's hand started shaking. I can't help you. Please leave. Abigail spoke up. Doctor, I'm a healer. I've studied diseases, and I've seen the symptoms of nightshade poisoning. Dilated pupils, foam at the mouth, seizures, death within hours if the dose is high enough. She pulled out a small vial from her pocket. This is nightshade extract. The same kind that's been killing cattle on Broken Creek Ranch. The same kind I pulled out of an 8-year-old boy's system 3 days ago. She set the vial on Walsh's desk. Did Daniel and Mary Holloway have these symptoms before they died? Walsh stared at the vial like it was a snake. I can't. If I tell you, they'll kill me. Who will kill you? Nathan asked. I don't know his name, just that he works for Crane. Came to my office the day after your brother died. Said if I signed the certificates, said cholera, I'd get $500. If I didn't, I'd have an accident. Walsh's voice broke. I have a family, Mr. Holloway, a wife, 3 daughters. I couldn't risk it. What were the actual symptoms? Abigail pressed. Walsh closed his eyes. Dilated pupils, foam, seizures, exactly like you described. I knew it was poison, but I signed the certificates anyway. God forgive me, I signed them. Red, who'd been standing by the door, spoke up. Will you testify in court? Against William Crane, I'd be dead before the trial started. Not if we protect you, Nathan said. Not if we bring him down first. Walsh shook his head. You can't protect me from Crane. He owns half this territory. Judges, sheriffs, politicians. You go up against him, you'll lose. And you'll take everyone you love down with you. He looked at Abigail, including her. They took the late train back to Cedar Bend, arrived around 8 o'clock to find Myrtle on the porch rifle in hand, face grim. We got trouble. What happened? Nathan asked. Man came by this afternoon, said his name was Charles Henderson, said he needed to speak with Abigail. Abigail's blood went cold. Where is he now? I sent him away, but he said he'd be back, said you'd want to hear what he had to say. Nathan turned to Abigail. Who's Charles Henderson? The man who swindled me, the one who took my $40 and left me stranded. He's here in Cedar Bend. He's supposed to be in jail, in Laramie, mail fraud charges. Red swore. Someone let him out, or he escaped. Either way, it's not good. They found Henderson the next morning. He was waiting on his porch when Abigail came out to feed the chickens, sitting in Nathan's rocking chair like he owned the place. He looked different than she'd imagined. Younger, maybe 30, handsome in a slick, calculated way. The kind of man who'd learned early how to use his looks to get what he wanted. Hello, Abigail, he said. We need to talk. Nathan appeared in the doorway behind her, hand on his gun belt. You've got 30 seconds to state your business and get off my property. Henderson held up his hands. Easy, Mr. Holloway. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to make a deal. I don't make deals with thieves, not even when the deal could save Miss Winter's life. Abigail stepped forward. What are you talking about? Henderson pulled a folded newspaper from his coat, handed it to her. It was from an Allentown paper, 3 weeks old. The headline read, Mill Fire Defendants Released on Appeal, Seek Witness Who Testified Against Them. Below that, 3 photographs. 3 men, all of them staring at the camera with the kind of eyes that promised violence. Abigail's hands started shaking. They got out. Appeals court overturned the conviction. Technicality, they walked free 2 weeks ago. Henderson leaned forward, and the first thing they did was put a $500 bounty on information about your whereabouts. He smiled. Now I know where you are, and I could tell them for $500 I'd be tempted. Nathan's hand moved to his gun. Or, Henderson continued quickly, I could forget I ever saw you, could tell them the trail went cold in Ohio, could give you time to disappear. For how much? Abigail asked. 500, same as the bounty, plus my silence about the mill fire, about the testimony, about why you really left Pennsylvania. Abigail looked at Nathan. His face was carved from stone, but she could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. $500 they didn't have, on top of the $5,000 owed to Crane. I don't have that kind of money, Abigail said, but Mr. Holloway does, or he did before Crane started bleeding him dry. Henderson stood. I'll give you 3 days to come up with it. After that, I sent a telegram to Allentown with your exact location, and those 3 men will be on the next train west. He tipped his hat. Pleasure seeing you again, Abigail. I'll be in town, at the saloon. You know where to find me. He walked off the porch, mounted a waiting horse, rode away without looking back. Abigail stood there, newspaper in hand, staring at the photographs of 3 men who wanted her dead. Nathan put his hand on her shoulder. We'll figure this out. How you don't have $500, and even if you did, Henderson would just come back for more. Blackmailers always do. Then we don't pay him. Then he tells them where I am. Then we deal with them when they come. Abigail looked at him. Nathan, these men burned down a factory to cover up a murder. They killed a 17-year-old boy because he witnessed a foreman stealing. When I testified, they swore they'd find me. They meant it. Her voice shook. If they come here, people will die. You, Ed Myrtle, maybe Tommy, and it'll be my fault for staying, for not leaving when I had the chance. Nathan turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders, steady and warm. Listen to me. You're not responsible for evil men doing evil things. You testified because it was right. You came here because you had nowhere else to go. You stayed because we need you. He pulled her closer. I need you. That night, Abigail found Nathan in the barn. He was brushing Sable, the rhythmic motion of the brush, through the horse's coat, the only sound in the quiet space. Lantern light made his shadow long against the wall. She stood in the doorway watching him work. Finally, he spoke without turning around. You should say it. Say what? That you're leaving, that this is too much, that you came here for a quiet life, not to be caught between a banker who kills for land and criminals who kill for revenge. Abigail stepped into the barn. Is that what you want me to say? No. Nathan set down the brush, turned to face her. But it's what you should say, what any sane person would say. She moved closer. I've never been particularly sane. Abigail, I need to tell you something, she said. Something I should have told you weeks ago. Nathan waited. I'm afraid, Abigail said. Terrified, actually. Not of Crane, not of Henderson, not even of the men from Allentown. She met his eyes. I'm afraid I'm poison. Every choice I make turns to ash. My father worked himself to death trying to give me a better life. I trusted Charles Henderson and lost everything. I testified at that trial and had to run for my life. Her voice broke. And now I'm here, and you've given me a home, and Tommy started healing, and Myrtle treats me like family. And I'm terrified that being here caring about all of you is going to destroy you the same way everything else I've touched has been destroyed. She took a shaky breath. What if I'm the common denominator? What if loving me is what kills you? Nathan closed the distance between them in 2 steps. His hands cupped her face, rough palms against her cheeks. You want to know what I'm afraid of? His voice was rough, raw. I'm terrified that if I let myself love you, God will take you away too. Everyone I've ever loved has died. My wife, my brother, his wife. I've spent 7 years keeping everyone at arm's length because caring hurts too much. His forehead pressed against hers. But you came into my life anyway. Saved me by that creek. Saved Tommy. Became part of this family without asking permission. And now I'm in love with you, Abigail Winters. I'm in love with you, and it scares the hell out of me because what if you're right? What if I'm cursed to lose everyone who matters? Abigail's hands came up to cover his. Then we're both fools, because I'm in love with you too. God help us both. God help us both, Nathan echoed. And then he was kissing her. Not gentle, not tentative, but fierce and desperate and full of everything they'd been holding back for weeks. Abigail kissed him back with equal hunger. Her hands in his hair, his arms around her waist pulling her close. They broke apart only when breathing became necessary. Nathan rested his forehead against hers again. I don't know how to keep you safe. From Crane, from Henderson, from those men coming from Pennsylvania. I don't know how to protect everyone I love and keep this ranch and pay that loan and stop a killer who's already murdered twice. Then we figure it out together, Abigail said. No more keeping each other at arm's length. No more protecting each other by pushing away. We stand together, whatever comes. Together, Nathan agreed. They stood there in the barn lantern light, flickering the smell of hay and horse and the faint scent of lavender from Abigail's soap mixing in the air. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the mountains. Inside, 2 people who'd lost everything chose to risk everything again. On each other. The next evening, Nathan found Abigail on the porch. She sat in one of the rocking chairs watching the sun set over the mountains, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He sat in the chair beside her. For a long moment, they rocked in silence. Then Nathan said, I want to court you properly. Do this right. Abigail looked at him. We're past proper, Nathan. I sleep under your roof. I care for your nephew. Half the town thinks I'm your mistress already. Then let me ask you something. He took her hand. When this is over, when Crane is gone and the ranch is safe, and you're not looking over your shoulder for men who want you dead, will you marry me? Abigail's breath caught. Are you proposing? I'm promising that if you'll have me, I'll spend every day proving I'm not Charles Henderson, that my word means something, that when I say forever, I mean it. Nathan, you don't have to answer now, just think about it, because I love you, Abigail, and I want a future with you, not just as my housekeeper or Tommy's caregiver, but as my wife, my partner, the woman I build a life with. Abigail set down her coffee cup. You know what scares me most about that promise? What? That I want it too much, that I'm already imagining it. A life here with you, with Tommy, maybe children of our own someday. A future that's real and lasting and built on something solid. She looked at him, and I'm terrified I'll jinx it by wanting it. Like God's going to look down and say, you've been happy for 5 minutes, Abigail, Time to take it away. Nathan stood, pulled her up from the chair. Then we'll be terrified together, but we'll also be happy together and we'll fight for it together. He kissed her, slow this time, gentle, a promise rather than a question. Tommy watched from his bedroom window upstairs. He'd been watching them all week, seen the way they looked at each other, the way Uncle Nathan smiled again for the first time since Aunt Sarah died, the way Miss Abigail Mama touched Uncle Nathan's hand when she thought no one was looking. He'd been writing in his journal, words he couldn't say but could put on paper. Uncle Nathan loves Miss Abigail. Miss Abigail loves Uncle Nathan. Maybe they'll get married. Maybe she'll stay forever. Maybe I'll have a mama again. He closed the journal, pressed it against his chest, and smiled. William Crane sat in his Cheyenne office with 3 men. They were the kind of men you hired when you needed problems solved permanently. Ex-soldiers, killers, men with no conscience and no loyalty beyond money. The target is here. Crane pointed to a map of Broken Creek Ranch. Nathan Holloway, his nephew, and a woman named Abigail Winters. The leader of the 3, a scarred man named Pike, leaned forward. 3 targets. What's the job? I want the boy alive. He's my insurance. Nathan Holloway won't default on the loan if I'm holding his nephew hostage. And the other 2? Kill Holloway if he interferes. But the woman, I want her brought to me, alive. She has skills I can use. And if she won't cooperate, she can watch the boy die. Pike smiled. It wasn't pleasant. When do you want this done? Tomorrow night. The ranch is isolated. Most of the hands will be in the south pasture for fall branding. The house will be vulnerable. Crane pushed an envelope across the desk. 1,000 now. Another 1,000 when the job's done. Pike took the envelope, counted the bills. We'll need details. Guard rotations. Layout. Weaknesses. Crane provided everything. And as the 3 men left his office, he poured himself a bourbon. Tomorrow night, Nathan Holloway would learn what it meant to cross William Crane. Tomorrow night, everything would change. The next day started normal. Breakfast, chores. Nathan and Red rode out to check the fence line. Myrtle taught Abigail how to make her famous sourdough starter. Tommy fed the horses and wrote in his journal. Normal, quiet, peaceful. The kind of day that makes you forget danger exists. By late afternoon, Nathan and Red still hadn't returned. Myrtle frowned at the clock. They should be back by now. Fence line doesn't take this long. Maybe they found more damage, Abigail said. But something twisted in her gut. Some instinct honed by years of watching for danger in mill floors and dark alleys. Something was wrong. Tommy, she called. Come inside, now. Tommy appeared from the barn, slate board in hand. Why, bueno, just come, please. He walked toward the house. That's when Abigail saw them. 3 men on horseback coming up the road from the south. Not ranch hands. Strangers. Moving with purpose. Myrtle, Abigail said quietly, get your gun. Myrtle's hand went to her apron pocket, came out with the Derringer. Tommy, run. Back door. Now. Tommy looked at the riders. His eyes went wide. And then he did something Abigail would never forget. He opened his mouth and screamed, run. His first word in 18 months, a scream of pure terror, because he recognized one of the riders, the man from that night, the man who'd talked to his father about the silver, the man who'd come back 3 days later with tea for Daniel and Mary, the man who'd killed his parents. The riders spurred their horses, closed the distance fast. Myrtle fired the Derringer, hit one in the shoulder. He kept coming. Abigail grabbed Tommy, pulled him toward the house. They made it to the porch before the lead rider was off his horse. Pike, 6 feet tall, scarred face, faster than a man his size should be. He grabbed Tommy by the collar, lifted him off his feet. Got him. Tommy fought, kicked, tried to bite. Pike backhanded him. Tommy's head snapped to the side. Blood from his split lip. Abigail launched herself at Pike. Let him go! Pike caught her wrist, twisted. She felt something pop. Pain shot up her arm. He shoved her back. She hit the porch railing. Hard. Myrtle fired again. Missed. One of the other riders was off his horse now. Disarmed Myrtle. Held her against the wall. Pike looked at Abigail, still on the ground, cradling her wrist. William Crane sends his regards. He's got business with the boy. And with you. He tied Tommy's hands, gagged him. Tommy's eyes were wild, terrified. He looked at Abigail. She could see him mouthing a word, over and over. Mama, mama, mama. Pike threw a folded note on the porch. Then he mounted his horse, Tommy thrown over the saddle in front of him. The three riders wheeled their horses, galloped back the way they came. Within 30 seconds, they were gone. Abigail crawled to the note, her wrists screaming, opened it with shaking hands. The note read, Holloway the boy is at the old silver mine. Come alone and he dies. Send the woman to me by midnight. She agrees to marry me, sign over any claim to your estate, and I'll return the boy unharmed. Refuse, and you'll bury your nephew next to your brother. Your choice, what do you see? Myrtle helped Abigail to her feet. We need to find Nathan. Now. But Nathan was already coming. They'd heard the gunshots from a mile away. Ridden back at a gallop, he dismounted before Sable even stopped. Took in Abigail's swelling wrist, Myrtle's pale face, the empty yard. Where's Tommy? Abigail handed him the note. Nathan read it. His face went white, then red, then blank. The kind of blank that meant violence was coming. He took my nephew. It's a trap, Red said. We go there, we're all dead. I don't care, I'm not letting Crane hurt that boy. Nathan, Abigail said, let me go. Absolutely not. He wants me. Let me be the bait. You and Red follow. We end this tonight. I won't let you. That boy calls me Mama, Abigail's voice cracked. I heard him, in his sleep. He dreams about his mother and he calls my name. I'm not letting Crane hurt him. I'm not. She grabbed Nathan's arm with her good hand. Please, trust me, we can do this together. Nathan looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, at the woman who'd saved his life, saved Tommy becoming part of his family, at the woman he loved. Together, he said finally, but we do it my way. Red gets the sheriff, I get the ranch hands, we surround that mine. And if Crane so much as breathes wrong, I put a bullet in him. Agreed. As the sun set over Broken Creek Ranch, they prepared for war. Abigail wrapped her wrist, loaded a Derringer Myrtle gave her, tucked it in her boot. Nathan checked his rifle, his revolver, the knife in his belt. Red rode for town, for the sheriff, for anyone who'd help. And in a mine 10 miles north, Tommy Holloway sat tied to a post, gagged and crying silent tears, because the man who'd killed his parents was standing right in front of him, telling him exactly how this night was going to end. As darkness fell over Wyoming territory, 5 people rode toward an abandoned silver mine. Abigail Winters, who'd come west with 62 cents and found a family worth dying for. Nathan Holloway, who'd lost everyone he loved and couldn't bear to lose again. Red Callahan, who'd seen enough evil in his life to recognize it when it came. And William Crane, who'd killed twice for land and wouldn't hesitate to kill again. Plus one 8-year-old boy who'd been silent for 18 months, who'd finally found his voice, who was about to scream the one word that would change everything: murder. But first there would be blood, there would be gunfire, there would be a choice between love and survival, and there would be a woman standing in a mine with poison in her pocket and a killer's gun to her head, knowing that the next 5 minutes would decide whether the family she'd found would live to see morning, or whether Broken Creek Ranch would become a graveyard. The answer was coming, fast. The ride to the old silver mine took an hour through darkness, so complete it felt like riding into the throat of the world. Abigail sat behind Nathan on Sable, her injured wrist throbbing with every hoofbeat. The Derringer in her boot pressed against her ankle, and in her pocket, wrapped in oilcloth, a small flask of whiskey, laced with enough yarrow extract to drop a man twice Crane's size. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the best weapon is one they don't see coming. Abby girl, behind them, Red followed on his buckskin, silent, grim, rifle across his saddle. They'd agreed on the plan before leaving. Abigail would go in alone, appear to surrender, get close enough to Crane to use the poisoned whiskey. Nathan and Red would circle wide, find positions in the rocks, wait for her signal. Then all hell would break loose. It was a terrible plan. It was also the only plan they had. The mine came into view as the moon broke through clouds. An abandoned shaft dug into the hillside, timber supports rotting with age. Rocks scattered across the entrance like broken teeth. And there, silhouetted against a fire burning in a pit, 3 figures. two men with rifles, and William Crane, holding Tommy by the collar like a dean on a leash. Abigail's heart clenched. Even from 50 yards away, she could see Tommy's face, bruised, terrified. But his eyes were blazing with something that looked like fury. Nathan reined in Sable. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice low. "We can rush them. 3 against 3. And Tommy's the first one who dies." Abigail touched his hand. "Trust me, I know what I'm doing. If anything happens to you, then you make sure Tommy gets home safe. That's all that matters." She slid off the horse. Her boots hit packed earth. She took the flask from her pocket, made sure the cap was loose, easy to open. Then she walked toward the fire. Crane saw her coming, smiled. "Miss Winters, how punctual. I do appreciate a woman who understands deadlines." Abigail stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk, not close enough to grab. "Let Tommy go. You wanted me. I'm here." "In due time. First, we have business to discuss." Crane gestured to one of his men. "Pike, check her for weapons." The scarred man moved forward. His hands were rough as he patted her down. Found the derringer in her boot. Well, the little bird has talons." He tossed the gun aside, didn't check her pockets, didn't see the flask. Thank God for small mercies. Pike stepped back, nodded to Crane. She's clean." Crane released Tommy, shoved him toward the mine entrance. "Tie him to that post. Make sure he can watch." As Pike secured Tommy, Crane walked a slow circle around Abigail, like a buyer inspecting livestock. "You're an interesting woman, Miss Winters. Resourceful, intelligent, skilled at healing. Exactly the kind of asset a man like me could use." "I'm not an asset. I'm a person." "Semantics." Crane stopped in front of her. "Here's how this works. You sign these papers." He produced a folded document from his coat. "Marriage contract, property transfer, standard legal documents. You sign them, become my wife in young Thomas' lives. You refuse and he does. Slowly, painfully, while you watch." Abigail looked at the papers. At Tommy tied to the post with tears streaming down his face. At the dark shapes in the rocks where Nathan and Red were hidden. "Why?" she asked. "You're rich. You can have any woman you want. Why force me?" "Because you represent everything I've built my empire fighting against. You're a woman alone who survived, who thrived, who saved lives and earned respect without a man's name or money. You're proof that my entire worldview is wrong." Crane's smile went cold. "And I can't tolerate that. So I'll break you, make you into what women should be. Obedient, useful, mine." Abigail met his eyes. "You're insane." "I'm practical. Now sign the papers, or watch the boy die." Pike pulled out a knife, held it to Tommy's throat. Tommy's eyes went wide. He tried to speak around the gag. Failed. "Wait," Abigail said. She pulled the flask from her pocket. "I need a drink first. My hands are shaking. I can't hold a pen steady." Crane studied her. "Whiskey. For courage." She uncapped the flask, took a small sip, made a show of grimacing. "God, that's terrible, but it helps." She held out the flask. "Want some? Celebrate your victory." Crane hesitated, then he laughed. "Why not? I have one after all." He took the flask, drank deep. Abigail watched the liquid go down, watched his throat work, counted seconds. 1, 2, 3. Yarrow was fast-acting, but not instant. She needed to keep him talking. "Tell me something," she said. "Did you really kill Daniel and Mary Holloway?" Crane wiped his mouth, handed back the flask. "Of course I did. Daniel's survey found $2 million in silver on land I'd been trying to acquire for 5 years. I couldn't let him tell Nathan, couldn't risk them mining it themselves." He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather. "How bio, arsenic in their evening tea. Mimics cholera perfectly. 3 days from healthy to dead. I've used it before. Very effective." That's when Tommy ripped the gag out of his mouth. He'd been working at it the whole time, using his teeth to loosen the knot. And now it fell away, leaving his face bare and his voice free for the first time in 18 months. "Murderer!" The word ripped out of him like a scream, like 18 months of silence breaking all at once. "You killed my mama. You killed my papa. They found your silver and you killed them." Everyone froze. Crane's face went white. Pike's hand tightened on the knife, and Tommy kept screaming. I heard you that night outside our house, telling your man to put the poison in the tea. I hid under the bed. I heard everything. His voice was hoarse, breaking, but loud. So loud. Crane's expression changed, from shock to calculation to cold fury. The boy can testify. He looked at Pike. Kill him, now. Pike raised the knife. Crack! A rifle shot split the night. Pike's head snapped back. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Nathan stepped out of the Rock's rifle smoking. Touch that boy again and you're dead. Red appeared on the other side, his own rifle aimed at Crane's chest. Drop your weapons, all of you. Crane's second man hesitated, then slowly lowered his gun, but Crane grabbed Abigail, spun her around, pressed a pistol to her head. Clever Holloway, but not clever enough. His arm wrapped around Abigail's throat, the gun barrel cold against her temple. Drop your rifles or I kill her. Nathan's face went blank, the kind of blank that meant he was calculating odds and not liking them. Let her go, Crane. No, I think I'll keep her. Ride out of here. Disappear. You'll never find us. You can't run forever. Watch me. Crane started backing toward the horses, dragging Abigail with him. She could feel him shaking, not from fear, from something else. The yarrow was kicking in. His grip loosened slightly. His breathing got heavier. What did you— The whiskey, Abigail said. Yarrow extract, sedative, strong enough to drop a bull. Crane's legs buckled. The gun fell from his hand. Abigail kicked it away, spun out of his grip. Crane collapsed to his knees. You poisoned me. I saved you, actually, from making this worse than it already is. Nathan crossed the distance in 3 strides, grabbed Crane by the collar, slammed him against a rock. You killed my brother. You tried to kill me. You terrorized my family. His fist connected with Crane's jaw. Once, twice, 3 times. Blood sprayed. Crane's head lolled. Boss, Red's voice cut through the rage. Boss, we need him alive to testify. Nathan hit him one more time, then pulled back, breathing hard. Tie him up, both of them. Red moved to secure Crane and the surviving gunman while Nathan ran to Tommy. He cut the ropes, pulled the boy into his arms. You're safe. I've got you. You're safe. Tommy wrapped his arms around Nathan's neck and spoke the second sentence in 18 months. I was so scared, Uncle Nathan. I know, but you were brave. So brave. Abigail joined them, put her hand on Tommy's back. He reached for her, one arm around Nathan, one around Abigail. Mama, Papa, don't let go. Nathan's eyes met Abigail's over Tommy's head. Papa. The boy had called him Papa and called her Mama. For the first time they were a family, not by blood, not by law, but by choice, by love, by standing together when the darkness came. Thunder cracked overhead, not summer thunder, winter thunder. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in as many seconds. Wind screamed through the rocks, and snow began to fall. Not gentle flakes, but hard-driving pellets that stung exposed skin. Blizzard, Red shouted over the wind. Early season. We need shelter. Nathan looked at the mine entrance, at the rotting timbers, at the darkness beyond. Not in there, those supports won't hold. But they didn't have a choice. The horses were already spooked, pulling at their reins. The fire was dying in the wind, and within minutes, visibility would be 0. Inside, Nathan commanded. Everyone, now. They dragged Crane and the gunman into the mine shaft, tied them to support beams. Tommy clung to Abigail. She wrapped him in her shawl, whispered reassurances. Red built a small wire from timber scattered on the floor. And that's when they heard it. Crack. The sound of wood splitting. The supports, Nathan said. The weight of the snow outside. Crack, 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 like dominoes falling. Run. They made it 10 feet before the entrance collapsed. Tons of rock and timber and snow crashed down, sealing them inside. The dust cleared slowly. Abigail did a quick head count by firelight. Nathan, Red, Tommy, Crane, the wounded gunman, all alive, all trapped. How long? She asked. Red examined the cave-in, shook his head. With this storm, could be days before anyone can dig us out. Maybe 48 hours. We don't have 48 hours. The wounded gunman coughed. Blood flecked his lips. Pike's bullet caught me in the lung. I can feel it. I'm dying. Abigail moved to him, examined the wound by firelight. He was right. Punctured lung, internal bleeding. Without surgery, he had maybe 6 hours. I can slow it down, she said. Make you more comfortable, but I can't fix this. Don't want you to fix it. The man's name was Carter. She'd heard Pike call him that. Want to confess before I meet my maker. Red pulled out a notebook, a pencil. I'll write it down, every word. For the next hours, the storm raged outside and the temperature dropped. Carter told them everything. How William Crane had hired him and Pike 2 years ago. How they'd poisoned Daniel and Mary Holloway's tea with arsenic. How they'd shot near Nathan's horse to make him fall. How they'd dumped nightshade in the water holes. All of it, in detail. While Red wrote furiously, when Carter finished, he looked at Tommy. I got a kid too, boy about your age. Haven't seen him in 3 years. Don't even know if he remembers me. His breathing was labored now, rattling. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him his daddy died trying to do one right thing. I'll tell him, Tommy said, his voice small but clear. Carter smiled, closed his eyes. Thank you, kid. He died 10 minutes later. Abigail closed his eyes, folded his hands across his chest. It was the first patient she had lost, the first person who died in her care. And it hurt, even though he'd been a killer, even though he'd helped murder Daniel and Mary. He'd still been someone's father, someone's son. Nathan put his arm around her. You did what you could. It wasn't enough. It never is, but you tried. That's what matters. Crane regained consciousness around midnight. The sedative was wearing off. His eyes opened, focused. He saw where he was, saw Carter's body covered with a blanket, saw the cave-in blocking the entrance. We're trapped. Yes, Nathan said. For how long? However long it takes. Crane tried to stand, couldn't. The ropes held. You can't keep me here. I'm a banker. People will look for me. Good. Let them find your body. Nathan's voice was cold. Right next to your hired killer, with a full confession written in his blood. That confession won't hold up in court. Hearsay. Maybe, but combined with Tommy's testimony, the doctor's statement, and the evidence of poisoned cattle, it'll be enough. Crane's eyes went to Tommy, huddled against Abigail. The boy's traumatized. No judge will believe him. I believe him, Nathan said, and that's all that matters right now. The night stretched long, the fire burned low. They fed it carefully, rationing the wood. The cold seeped in. Abigail wrapped Tommy in her arms, shared her body heat. Nathan wrapped around both of them, like a family huddling against the storm. Around 3 in the morning, Crane started talking. Delirium from the cold, or maybe just the need to confess before death came. I built everything from nothing, he said to no one in particular. 40 years, worked my way up from bank clerk to owner, invested smart, bought low, sold high, made myself into someone who mattered. By stealing from people, Red said, by taking opportunities. That's how the world works. The strong take from the weak. That's nature. That's not nature, Abigail said. That's cruelty. Crane laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think you're better than me, Miss Winters, you who came west on a lie, who trusted a con man, who's only here because you had nowhere else to go. I came west on hope, Abigail replied. And yes, I was lied to, but I survived, built something real. That's more than you can say. I built an empire. You built it on corpses. Crane fell silent. Hours passed. Tommy fell asleep against Abigail's chest, his breathing even and peaceful despite the cold and the dark, and the man who'd killed his parents tied to a beam 10 feet away. Nathan held them both. When we get out of here, he whispered to Abigail, I'm going to marry you. Properly. Church wedding. The whole town invited. I'm going to make you my wife and give Tommy a mother and build the life we should have had all along. When we get out of here, Abigail whispered back, I'm going to say yes. The rescue came on the 3rd day. They heard digging first, voices, the scrape of shovels against rock, then light, blessed, beautiful light pouring through a gap in the cave-in. Sheriff Thompson's face appeared. Anyone alive in there? 5 alive, Nathan called back. 1 dead and 1 who needs arresting. Within an hour, they were free. Myrtle fell on Tommy with tears streaming down her face. Doc Hammond checked everyone over. Abigail's wrist was broken. Nathan had frostbite on 3 fingers. Tommy was dehydrated, but otherwise fine. And William Crane handcuffed and loaded into a wagon bound for the territorial prison. But first, Sheriff Thompson had questions. They gave him Carter's written confession, Tommy's testimony, the map showing the silver vein, the doctor's statement from Cheyenne about the falsified death certificates. "This is enough," Thompson said. "More than enough. Crane's going to trial." The trial happened 2 weeks later in Cheyenne. The courtroom was packed, every seat taken, people standing in the aisles. Nathan testified, Abigail testified, Tommy testified, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. Read Carter's confession aloud. Every damning word. Doc Walsh testified about being paid to falsify death certificates. And then Charles Henderson took the stand. Henderson looked different, thinner, older. Like jail had aged him 10 years and 2 months. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said. "Charles Henderson." "And what is your occupation?" "I was a confidence man, mail-order bride scams mostly." "Who employed you?" Henderson's eyes went to Crane sitting at the defense table. "William Augustus Crane and his partner Robert Hensley. They ran a network across 6 territories, scammed 87 women, used the money to fund land acquisitions." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Henderson continued, showed ledgers, names, amounts, a complete record of Crane and Hensley's operation. By the time he finished, William Crane's face was the color of old paper. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes. Guilty on all counts: murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, theft, attempted murder, sentence life in prison, assets seized $890,000 in ill-gotten gains. Nathan's loan, forgiven. Fraudulent contract. The silver mine rights confirmed as Nathan's property. As the bailiff led Crane away, he looked at Abigail one last time. "You ruined me." "No," Abigail said. "You ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone knew it." 3 days after the trial, Nathan took Abigail to the hilltop overlooking Broken Creek Ranch, the same place where he'd first shown her the boundaries of his land, where they'd ridden together and talked about the future. The November sun was setting, turning the sky the color of hammered copper and rose gold. Nathan held her hand. Her injured wrist was wrapped in a splint, would be for another 6 weeks. But her other hand was free, and it fit perfectly in his. "I've been thinking," Nathan said. "Dangerous habit," he smiled, then grew serious. "We both came to this moment broken. You'd been swindled, abandoned, lost everything you had. I'd lost my wife, my brother, his wife, almost lost Tommy and the ranch. We were both so focused on surviving that we forgot how to live." He turned to face her fully. "But standing in that mine, trapped and cold, and thinking we might die, I realized something. I've been asking the wrong question all these years." "What question?" "I kept asking, why does God take everyone I love like I was cursed, like caring was a death sentence?" His hands cupped her face. "But the right question is, what am I supposed to do with the time I have?" And the answer is you, Tommy, building a life that matters. Not because it lasts forever, but because it means something while it's here. Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "Nathan, I told you in that barn that I wanted to marry you, that I'd wait as long as it took for you to believe I meant it." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring. Gold, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's, and her mother's before that. It's been waiting for the right woman." He held it up to the fading light. "Abigail Winters, we've been through hell together. Poison and kidnapping, and attempted murder, and a blizzard that almost killed us all. And every single time you stood beside me, not behind me, beside me, as an equal, as a partner." He dropped to one knee. "Marry me, not because you need my name or my protection or my money, but because when you think about the future, when you imagine growing old and raising Tommy and maybe having children of our own someday, you want me there, beside you, always." Abigail looked at the ring, at Nathan's face, at the ranch spread out below them like a promise made real. Yes, she said, 1,000 times yes. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stood, pulled her into his arms, kissed her like a man who'd been given a second chance at life and intended to make every second count. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had set. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "We should tell Tommy," Abigail said. "He already knows. Wrote it in his journal 3 days ago. Uncle Nathan is going to marry Mama. We're going to be a real family." Abigail laughed through her tears. Smart boy. Gets it from his mother. The wedding happened on a Sunday in December. The church in Cedar Bend was packed. Every pew filled, people standing along the walls. The whole town had come, not to judge, not to whisper, but to celebrate. Abigail wore a dress that Myrtle had helped her make. Simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. She carried wildflowers from the meadow behind the ranch tied with a ribbon the color of wheat. And when she walked down the aisle on Red Callahan's arm, she kept her spine straight and her eyes on Nathan standing at the altar in his good suit, looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever prayed. But before the ceremony started, Martha Keene stood up. The church went silent. Martha walked to the front, faced the congregation. "Before we begin, I have something to say." She turned to Abigail. "Miss Winters, when you first arrived in Cedar Bend, I judged you harshly, called you foolish for being swindled, said you'd come to a bad end. I was cruel and I was wrong." Her voice wavered. "Yesterday I heard about the trial, about how you faced down the man who killed Daniel and Mary Holloway, how you saved Tommy's life, how you stood beside Nathan Holloway when most women would have run." She held out her hand. "You're not a victim, Miss Winters. You're one of the strongest women I've ever met, and Cedar Bend is blessed to have you. Can you forgive an old fool?" Abigail took her hand. "There's nothing to forgive, Mrs. Keene. We all do the best we can with what we know." Martha squeezed her hand, then louder to the congregation. "Let it be known that Abigail Winters has my respect and my friendship, and anyone who questions her character answers to me." Applause broke out, soft at first, then growing. And when Abigail took her seat, it wasn't in the back row where strangers sat. It was in the front pew, right beside Myrtle, where family belonged. Pastor Grant kept the ceremony short, the way Nathan had requested. The words were old and familiar. Promises spoken by countless couples before them. Promises that would be spoken by countless more after, to have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and health, until death parted them. But when Nathan spoke those words, looking into Abigail's eyes, she heard something underneath them. A promise that went deeper than the ceremony. A vow that he would keep. Not because tradition demanded it, but because he chose to. Every single day. And when it came time for Abigail to speak her vows, she added her own. "I promise you won't face another storm alone. I promise you won't live in winter anymore. I promise to love you, not just with words, but with actions, every day. For the rest of my life." Nathan's eyes went bright. Pastor Grant smiled. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Nathan, you may kiss your bride." And he did. There in the church full of people who'd become her community, her family, her home. The town threw them a celebration after. Tables set up in the street, food and music and dancing. Cowboys from Broken Creek mixed with townspeople. Everyone united in the simple joy of seeing two people who'd found each other despite all odds. As the sun set and the lanterns were lit and the fiddle music filled the cooling air, Nathan pulled Abigail close on the makeshift dance floor. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "More than I ever thought possible." "Good, because this is just the beginning, Abigail. We've got a lifetime ahead of us." 2 weeks after the wedding, Abigail made an announcement. She stood in the Cedar Bend Town Hall facing a room full of curious faces. "The silver mine on Broken Creek property has been appraised at $2 million. Nathan and I have decided not to mine it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Instead, we're selling the mineral rights to the territorial government for $500,000. Half will go to expanding and improving the ranch. The other half will fund something this territory desperately needs." She unrolled a sketch on the table. "The Second Chance Home for Women. A boarding house specifically for women who arrive in Wyoming with nothing. Women who've been swindled, abandoned, widowed, or cast out. Women who need work and hope and a fresh start. She looked around the room. Every woman who comes through those doors will be given room and board, will be taught skills, healing, cooking, bookkeeping, whatever they need to support themselves. No judgment, no charity, just honest work and the chance to build a real future. Martha Keene stood. How much are you investing in this $250,000? Enough to buy the old Hargrove boarding house, renovate it, and fund operations for 10 years. And who'll run it? I will, with help from anyone who wants to volunteer. Martha looked at the sketch, at Abigail, at the faces around the room. Then she smiled. Count me in. I'll volunteer 3 days a week. Other hands went up. Mrs. Hargrove, the pastor's wife. Women who'd once whispered about Abigail now offering to stand beside her. Within a month, the Second Chance home opened its doors. The first resident was Emma Parker, 20 years old, 7 months pregnant, abandoned by a man who'd promised to marry her. Abigail welcomed her personally. You're safe here, and you're not alone. Emma's baby, a girl named Hope, was born that winter. Abigail delivered her, same as her grandmother had delivered 300 babies back in Pennsylvania. And when Hope took her first breath and cried out, strong and healthy, Emma looked at Abigail with tears streaming down her face. Thank you for giving me a chance when no one else would. We all deserve a second chance, Abigail said. That's what this place is about. Time jump, spring 1886. 2 years after the wedding, Abigail woke to pain lancing through her abdomen. Not sickness, not injury, labor. Nathan, she gasped. It's time. Nathan was up instantly, shouting for Myrtle, for Red to ride for Doc Hammond, for Tommy to boil water and fetch clean linens. The house erupted into controlled chaos. Myrtle took charge, sent the men away, helped Abigail into the bedroom she and Nathan shared. You know what to do, child. Your grandmother taught you well. Just breathe through it. The labor lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of pain and pushing, and Myrtle's steady voice saying, That's it. You're doing fine. Almost there. And then just as dawn broke over the mountains, a baby's cry split the air. It's a boy, Myrtle said, her voice thick with emotion. A healthy, beautiful boy. She placed him on Abigail's chest. He was perfect. Dark hair like Nathan's. Tiny hands that gripped Abigail's finger with surprising strength. Nathan was allowed in then. He crossed the room on shaking legs, saw his son for the first time, and wept. We have a son, Abigail. A son. Samuel Nathan, Abigail said. Your wife's father, and you. Nathan held the baby, looked at him like he was made of spun gold and starlight. Tommy appeared in the doorway, 10 years old now, taller, stronger, his voice fully recovered and used often. Can I see him, my little brother? Come here, Nathan said. Tommy approached carefully, looked at Samuel with wonder. Hi, little brother. I'm Tommy. I'm going to protect you, I promise. Nathan looked at Abigail, at their son, at Tommy standing beside them. We're a family. We always were, Abigail said. We just made it official. 1887. Sarah Grace was born on a spring morning, named for Nathan's first wife with Myrtle's blessing. Sarah would be honored, Myrtle said, holding the baby. This child carries her name into the future. 1889, Ruth Elizabeth arrived during a thunderstorm, loud from the moment she entered the world. This one's going to be trouble, Myrtle predicted, just like her mother. Abigail laughed. I was never trouble. Child, you saved a dying man, faced down a killer, and built a home for women everyone else gave up on. If that's not trouble, I don't know what is. 1891, Elijah came quietly, barely cried, just looked around with solemn eyes. Thoughtful, Nathan said, like he's already figuring out the world. 1894. Margaret was the last, the baby of the family, fierce from day one. 5 children, Nathan said, holding her. 5 miracles. By then, Broken Creek Ranch had grown to 12,000 acres, 3,000 head of cattle, 50 employees, an empire built not on stolen land or murdered rivals, but on honest work and fair dealing. And the Second Chance home. It had helped 63 women in its first 10 years. Emma Parker ran a satellite location in Cheyenne. Martha Keene taught reading and writing. Myrtle taught cooking and household management. And Abigail taught healing, herbalism, midwifery, passing on her grandmother's knowledge to a new generation of women who'd use it to help others. 1900, Tommy married Hope Parker, Emma's daughter, 17 years old with her mother's determination and her own quiet strength. Nathan walked Hope down the aisle, and when the pastor asked, "Who gives this woman?" Tommy spoke up from the groom's side. "Her mother and I do, together." Emma beamed, because Tommy had become the son she'd never expected. Part of the family that had saved her life 16 years before. 1906, Red Callahan died in his sleep, 78 years old, peaceful. They buried him on the hill overlooking Broken Creek, with a marker that read, "Red Callahan, friend, foreman, family." Nathan stood at the grave long after everyone else left. "You were right, old friend." She was worth waiting for. 1919. Myrtle passed at 86, still baking biscuits the day before, still giving orders, still the matriarch of a family that had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. Her last words to Abigail: "You did good, child. Better than good. You built something that lasts." 1924, the 41st anniversary. Nathan was 79 now. Abigail 71. Their children were grown, scattered but close. Samuel ran Broken Creek Ranch with his wife Mary, 4 children of their own. Sarah was a doctor in Cheyenne, one of the first female physicians in Wyoming. Ruth had married a rancher in Montana. 5 children, a ranch of her own. Elijah taught at the university in Laramie, history and literature. Margaret ran the Second Chance Home, expanded it to 3 locations, helped over 200 women find new lives. And Tommy was 62, a grandfather himself, still living on Broken Creek, still the first one Nathan called when something needed doing. The family reunion that year brought 140 people to the ranch, 6 generations, all descended from Nathan and Abigail. They filled the house, the yard, the barn, everywhere. And that evening, as the sun set and the grandchildren played and the great-grandchildren slept in their mother's arms, Nathan found Abigail in the kitchen, making apple butter, just like she did every fall. The smell filled the house, sweet and spiced and achingly familiar. "You're still making that," Nathan said, coming to stand beside her. "Always, as long as I can." She looked at him. This man she'd loved for 41 years. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, his hands gnarled with arthritis that no amount of Yarrow compress could fix. But his eyes were still whiskey-colored, still warm when they looked at her. "Do you remember the first time I made it?" Abigail asked. "You stood in this kitchen. Tommy watched you. I stood in that doorway and thought, she belongs here." "I knew then," Nathan said quietly. "Knew you were home." Abigail set down the spoon, turned to face him fully. "No regrets. Only one, that I didn't meet you 25 years sooner. Maybe we needed those years, needed to become who we had to be to find each other." Nathan pulled her into a slow dance. No music, just the sound of their breathing and the pop of the fire. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "Didn't I? Every day for 41 years. Not bad for a cowboy." They danced until the apple butter was ready, until the stars came out, until their bodies reminded them they weren't young anymore and standing too long hurt. But they were together, and that was all that mattered. January 15th, 1936, winter came early that year. Brutal, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and didn't let go. Nathan caught pneumonia in December. Despite everything Abigail knew about healing, despite all her herbs and knowledge and prayers, he grew weaker. By January, he was bedridden. All 5 children came home, brought their families, filled the house one last time. Nathan lay in the bed he'd shared with Abigail for 52 years, breathing shallow, each breath a struggle. Abigail sat beside him, holding his hand. "I'm not ready," she said. "Neither am I." His voice was barely a whisper. "But I don't think we get a choice." "Nathan, listen, please, wait." He squeezed her hand, weak but there. "You gave me everything, a family, a son to replace the one I lost. 4 more children I never thought I'd have. 52 years of joy and laughter and love. You gave me the same. Then we're even." He smiled. "See you soon, my love." "Not too soon. I have things to do first." "I'll wait. I'm good at waiting for you." Those were his last words. He closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. And at 3:17 in the morning, with his family surrounding him and Abigail's hand in his, Nathan Holloway took his last breath. He was 90 years old. He'd lived a full life, a good life, a life that mattered. Abigail held him for a long time after, her head on his chest, feeling the stillness where his heartbeat had been. "Thank you," she whispered, "for waiting for me, for keeping your promises, for loving me when I didn't think anyone could." They tried to pull her away, to comfort her, to help her to bed, but she wouldn't move, not yet. She needed these last few moments with the man who'd given her everything. They buried him 3 days later on the hill overlooking Broken Creek, next to Red, next to Myrtle. The whole territory came, cowboys he'd employed, families he'd helped, children delivered by Abigail who'd grown into adults with children of their own. Every life he'd touched, and there were so many of them. Samuel gave the eulogy. "My father built this ranch from nothing, but more than that, he built a family, a community, a legacy that will last long after we're all gone. He taught us that your word is your bond, that hard work matters, that love is a choice you make every day." He looked at Abigail standing beside the grave with Tommy's arm around her shoulders. "And he taught us that it's never too late to start over, never too late to find love, never too late to build something that matters." They lowered Nathan into the ground. Abigail stood there until everyone else had left, until it was just her and Tommy and the wind moving through the grass. "Mama," Tommy said gently, "it's time to go." "I know." But she looked at the headstone one more time. Nathan Holloway, 1845 to 1936. He waited for the right woman. She was worth every moment. "Goodbye, my love," Abigail whispered. "I'll see you soon." January 16th, 1936. Abigail died in her sleep that night. Peaceful, no pain, just closed her eyes and didn't open them again. They found her in the morning in the bed she'd shared with Nathan, her hands stretched across the empty space where he'd always slept, like even in death she'd been reaching for him. Tommy read her journal later. The last entry written the night Nathan died: "He's gone, and I find I can't bear this world without him, not after 52 years of having him beside me. So I'm following him, not out of despair, but out of love, because some promises extend beyond death, and I promised him we'd face everything together. Even this." They buried her beside Nathan, so close their headstones touched. Abigail Winters Holloway, 1853 to 1936. She came with nothing but dignity. She left a legacy of love. Spring 1974, Tommy Holloway, 98 years old, sat in a rocking chair on the porch of Broken Creek Ranch, the same porch where Abigail had found him 68 years ago, where she'd made him feel safe for the first time since his parents died. His great-great-grandchildren sat on the steps, recording his voice, asking him to tell the story one more time. "Tell us about great-great-grandma Abigail, how she saved great-great-grandpa." Tommy smiled, picked up a jar from the table beside him. Apple butter, made that morning by his granddaughter Sarah, from Abigail's recipe, the one passed down through 6 generations. "Pull up a chair, children. I'm about to tell you how your great-great-grandmother saved a dying cowboy by a creek and netted it up, saving all of us who came after." He closed his eyes, remembered. September 1883. A woman stepped off a train with 62 cents and a prayer. The ranch still stood, 140 years after Nathan built it. Solar panels on the barn now, satellite internet, modern tractors, but the original house remained, preserved, protected, because it was history, heritage, home, and the second chance home, now the Abigail Winters Holloway Center for Women's Hope, a domestic violence shelter, 3 locations, serving over 1,000 women a year. The same mission, the same promise. You're safe here. You're not alone. A plaque hung by the entrance, founded 1884 by Abigail Winters Holloway, because every woman deserves a second chance. Final scene, the kitchen of Broken Creek Ranch. Modern appliances, ancient bones. On the wooden table, weathered and scarred from a century and a half of use, sat a jar of apple butter, still made every fall, still from Abigail's recipe, still filling the house with the smell of cinnamon and apples and home. On the wall, a photograph, the 1924 family reunion, 140 people, all descended from a woman who came west on a lie and a man who believed in second chances. Sunlight streamed through the window. The same window where Abigail had stood making that first batch of apple butter, where Nathan had watched her and known she belonged. And if you listened close, if you stood very still, you could almost hear them. Abigail humming hymns while she worked, Nathan's deep voice saying, "You belong here." Tommy's laughter, children playing, a family built not on blood but on choice, on love, on standing together when the darkness came. They came to Wyoming territory with nothing but 62 cents and a prayer. They left us everything, not just the land or the legacy. They left us the lesson that love isn't about luck, it's about choice. You choose to trust, you choose to stay, you choose to build. And if you're blessed, you get a lifetime to keep choosing every single day. That's the real treasure. Not silver, not land, each other. Always each other.